For 2 years, Elena Ward disappeared behind neutral clothes and silent loyalty, serving Victor Moreau, the city's most feared crime boss. One Friday night, she wore red, planning to reclaim her life with a blind date. Victor stopped her at the door with a question that shattered everything. "Who are you planning to kiss after work in that dress?" In that moment, 2 years of restrained desire exploded into dangerous obsession. Will you stay until the end to see how far love can fall into darkness? Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The clock on Elena Ward's desk read 6:47 p.m. when she slipped the red dress over her head in the executive bathroom. For 2 years, she had worn beige, gray, navy, colors designed to blend into expensive furniture and mahogany walls, colors that whispered, "I'm not here," while her fingers typed confidential emails and her voice confirmed meetings that decided the fate of million-dollar deals. Colors that made her invisible to everyone except the one man who noticed everything. Tonight, she chose red. The fabric clung to curves she'd spent 2 years hiding beneath professional blazers and pencil skirts that ended exactly at the knee. The neckline dipped just low enough to suggest she had a life beyond these walls, beyond the 60-hour weeks and the meticulous scheduling of Victor Moreau's empire. She studied her reflection, dark hair falling loose instead of pinned, lips painted the color of warning signs, eyes that finally looked alive instead of merely efficient. Her phone buzzed. "Running 10 minutes late. Can't wait to meet you." David Elena smiled at the message. David from the marketing firm 2 blocks over. David with the easy laugh and the normal job and the life that didn't require security clearances or encrypted phones. David who knew nothing about the man whose coffee she made exactly right every morning, whose appointments she guarded like nuclear codes, whose rare smiles she'd learned to read like weather patterns predicting storms. She'd met David at a coffee shop 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday afternoon when Victor was in court, and she'd stolen 20 minutes of freedom. David had fumbled his order, apologized for bumping her arm, and asked for her number with the kind of nervous sincerity that belonged to a different world entirely. A normal world. A safe world. A world that didn't include Victor Moreau. Elena checked her makeup one final time, smoothed the dress over her hips, and gathered her courage. The office was nearly empty. Most of the staff had fled by 6 on Fridays, eager to pretend they worked for a normal company instead of the polished front of the city's most powerful crime organization. She'd worked here long enough to know the difference between the quarterly reports she filed and the real business conducted in Victor's private office after the glass doors locked. She'd worked here long enough to know she should have quit 18 months ago. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward the exit, her coat folded over her arm despite the spring warmth outside. The space felt cavernous at this hour. All that gleaming architecture and modern art, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city Victor controlled through a network of legitimate businesses and less legitimate arrangements, beautiful and cold and powerful, just like the man who'd built it. "Elena." His voice stopped her 3 feet from freedom. She turned slowly, her heart already racing, knowing she'd made a mistake, knowing she should have changed in the parking garage or waited until she was safely in her car, or literally anywhere except here, in his territory, wearing evidence of a life he didn't control. Victor Moreau stood in the doorway of his office, 6 feet 2 inches of tailored menace in a charcoal suit that cost more than her monthly rent. At 38, he carried power the way other men carried weight, as something fundamental to his structure, impossible to separate from muscle and bone. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. Gray eyes that missed nothing. A face that belonged on Roman coins or Renaissance paintings of fallen angels. Beautiful and terrible and completely unforgiving. He was looking at her dress. "Mr. Moreau." She kept her voice steady, professional. The same tone she'd used for 2 years of "yes, sir," and "right away, sir," and "I'll handle it, sir." "I was just leaving." "I can see that." He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator who'd never learned to rush because nothing ever escaped him anyway. His gaze traveled from her loose hair to her painted lips to the red fabric that suddenly felt like a confession. "You have plans." It wasn't a question. Victor didn't ask questions when he already knew the answers. "Yes." Elena lifted her chin, refusing to apologize for having a life, refusing to acknowledge the way her pulse hammered against her throat, or the heat spreading through her chest under his attention. A dinner reservation. With? One word spoken soft as silk and sharp as a blade. She should have lied, should have claimed a girlfriend or a family obligation or anything except the truth. But 2 years of lying by omission, of pretending she didn't notice the way his gaze followed her across rooms or the way his voice softened when he spoke only to her, of ignoring the tension that crackled between them like electricity before a storm. 2 years had left her with just enough recklessness to be honest. A date. The words landed between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Victor went very still. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of a hurricane drawing breath before it destroys everything in its path. His eyes darkened to slate, his jaw tightening with something that looked dangerously close to fury. A date, he repeated, tasting the words like poison. He took another step closer, invading the careful distance she'd maintained between them for 24 months of professional boundaries and unspoken want. Who are you planning to kiss after work in that dress, Elena? The question hit her like a physical blow. Heat and ice and electric shock all at once, stripping away every pretense that this was a normal boss-secretary relationship, that the late nights and the accidental touches and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching meant nothing, that she was imagining the want she saw in his eyes right now, raw and possessive and completely inappropriate. That's none of your business. Her voice came out breathless despite her best effort at indignation. None of my business. Victor smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression she'd ever seen on his face. Not the cool distance he showed clients or the cold fury he reserved for enemies, but something hotter, hungrier. You've worked for me for 2 years, Elena. 2 years of knowing things that could destroy me. 2 years of access to information that men have died for possessing. 2 years of being the one person in this building I trust completely. And you think who you fuck is none of my business? The crude words sent a shock through her system. She'd heard him curse before, had taken calls from furious partners and typed emails threatening legal destruction. But never like this. Never directed at her with his voice rough and his eyes burning and his entire body radiating a barely controlled violence that should have terrified her. It didn't terrify her. That was the problem. I'm your secretary, Elena said, forcing steel into her spine. Not your property. No, Victor agreed, closing the final distance between them until she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably cost more than her dress. You're not my property. You're the woman who knows where every body is buried. You're the one person who could bring my entire empire down with a single phone call to the right federal prosecutor. You're the vulnerability I've allowed into my life despite every instinct screaming that trust is a luxury I can't afford. His hand came up, and for one breathless moment, Elena thought he might touch her face. Instead, his fingers caught the fabric of her coat, the only barrier between her skin and his attention. So yes, Elena, who you kiss in that fucking dress is absolutely my business. She should have been angry, should have slapped him or stormed out or filed a harassment complaint with HR, except they both knew there was no HR that would stand between Victor Moreau and anything he wanted. Should have done any of the things a normal woman would do when her boss crossed every line of professional conduct. Instead, she stood frozen, her breath coming too fast, her body betraying her with the heat pooling low in her belly and the ache spreading through her chest. Because underneath his fury, she recognized something else. Something that matched the want she'd been suppressing for 2 years of careful distance and controlled desire. Fear. Victor Moreau, the man who controlled half the city's underground economy, who sat across from politicians and crime lords with the same cool authority, who never showed weakness or doubt, was afraid. Afraid of losing her. You don't own me, she whispered, but the words came out wrong. Not defiant, but questioning, testing the boundaries of whatever this was between them. No, Victor said quietly, his thumb brushing against her coat in a gesture so small it might have been accidental if everything about him wasn't absolutely deliberate. But I protect what's mine, and whether you acknowledge it or not, Elena, you've been mine since the day you walked into my office and didn't flinch when Morrison pulled a gun during that meeting. She remembered, her first week, sitting in the corner with her laptop while Victor negotiated with a supplier who had decided to freelance with a competitor. Morrison had pulled a weapon, making demands, assuming the pretty new secretary was just decoration. Victor hadn't even glanced at the gun. He'd looked at Elena, waiting to see if she'd scream or run or crack under the reality of his world. She'd kept typing. Morrison had left in a body bag, but that wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was the look on Victor's face after the office cleared and the blood was scrubbed from the floor. The way he'd studied her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find interesting. The way he'd looked at her every day since. "That doesn't give you the right," Elena started, but Victor cut her off. "Cancel the date." 2 words, not a request. Her phone buzzed again. "Here, just parked. Where should I meet you?" Victor's eyes flicked to the phone in her hand, his jaw tightening. "Cancel it, Elena. Now." Something hot and reckless surged through her chest. 2 years of being careful and controlled and professional, of pretending she didn't fantasize about exactly this. Victor Moreau demanding she choose him, claiming her, dropping the mask of employer and employee to acknowledge the truth burning between them. But she'd learned to survive in his world by being smart, and smart meant recognizing the difference between fantasy and reality. Smart meant understanding that Victor Moreau didn't do relationships. He did control and power and transactions where everyone knew their role. Smart meant remembering what happened to people who became vulnerabilities in his life. They disappeared. "No," Elena said, and watched his eyes go dark. "No?" He repeated the word like he'd never heard it before. Like the concept of denial was foreign to a man who'd spent 20 years taking whatever he wanted from a city too afraid to tell him otherwise. "No," she confirmed, her voice steadier now. "I've given you 2 years, Mr. Moreau. 2 years of my life, my time, my—" She stopped before saying heart because that was too much truth. "My loyalty. But my personal life is mine. You don't get to control who I see or what I wear or who I kiss just because you're afraid I might tell someone your secrets." "No, this isn't about my secrets." Victor's voice dropped to something dangerous and intimate. "This is about the fact that you're walking out of here to meet some man who doesn't know you, who doesn't know that you take your coffee black because you say life's too short for cream, who doesn't know you won't use the elevator if you've had more than 1 cup because you like the excuse to take the stairs, who doesn't know that you alphabetize files by client priority instead of name because you understand how my mind works better than I do sometimes." Each observation hit like a revelation. Proof that he'd been watching, noticing, cataloging the details of her life with the same obsessive attention he paid to everything in his empire. "David doesn't need to know those things," Elena said softly. "David is normal. He works in marketing. He goes to happy hours and plays softball on weekends and probably hasn't killed anyone." "Probably?" Victor's smile was razor sharp. "How reassuring. You're going to trust your safety to a man who probably hasn't killed anyone." "I'm not in danger from David." "No," Victor agreed. "You're in danger because of me. Because anyone who wants to hurt me now knows the fastest way to do it is through you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Elena's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Victor's hand finally touched her. Not her face, but her wrist, his fingers circling the delicate bones with careful pressure. "3 weeks ago, you met David at Stella's Coffee on 5th Street. Tuesday afternoon, 2:17 p.m. You ordered an Americano and a blueberry scone. He bumped into you near the pickup counter and apologized 3 times before asking for your number." Ice flooded her veins. "How do you—" "Because Marcus was following you." Victor's voice was calm, factual, delivering information that shattered her world with clinical precision. "Marcus has been following you since 6 months after you started working for me, making sure you got home safely, making sure no one approached you who shouldn't, making sure you stayed safe in a city that would love to use you against me." Marcus. The quiet man in the dark sedan she'd noticed sometimes in her rearview mirror. The familiar face in the coffee shop she'd attributed to coincidence. The shadow she'd almost convinced herself was paranoia. "You've been having me followed," her voice was hollow. "For 18 months. 21 months, Victor corrected, since the Kozlov incident." The Kozlov incident. The sanitized phrase for the night a Russian crime family had tried to kidnap Victor's lawyer's daughter to force cooperation in a territory dispute. The night she'd realized exactly how dangerous his world really was. The night she should have quit. "You had no right." Elena tried to pull her wrist free, but Victor held firm. "I had every right," he said, his voice hard now. The moment you became valuable to me, you became a target. The moment you became someone. He stopped, jaw working. The moment I gave a fuck whether you lived or died, you stopped being safe. So you've been controlling my life. Anger flooded through the shock, hot and clarifying. Monitoring where I go, who I meet, making decisions about my safety without even asking. Yes. No apology, no justification, just acknowledgement. And David? She had to know. Is David even real, or is he some plant you... David's real. Victor's grip loosened slightly, his thumb pressing against her racing pulse. David is exactly what he appears to be, a marketing executive with mediocre credit and a studio apartment in Riverside who's been looking for a relationship for 8 months according to his dating profile. He's harmless, ordinary, and completely unaware that asking you out signed his death warrant. Elena's blood turned to ice. What? Not from me, Victor clarified, seeing her expression. From them. The Italians who've been circling my territory for 6 months. The ones who've been watching me, studying my patterns, looking for weakness. The ones who would love nothing more than to hurt me by taking someone I care about. His voice roughened on the last words, transforming them from tactical assessment to something closer to confession. You can't possibly think... Elena started, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't posturing, wasn't exaggerating to manipulate her. The fear she'd glimpsed earlier wasn't about losing control or maintaining power. It was genuine, visceral terror wrapped in fury and forced into the shape of authority, because that was the only way Victor Moreau knew how to protect anything. 3 days ago, he said quietly, my people intercepted communications from the Castellano family. They've identified you as a person of interest. They know your name, your address, your route to work, and your favorite grocery store. They know you live alone. They know you don't have family in the city. And as of this morning, they know you have a date tonight with David Morrison at Lucia's on 7th. The restaurant name hit her like a slap. She hadn't told anyone where they were meeting, hadn't posted it online or mentioned it to coworkers, which meant, you tapped my phone. The betrayal cut deeper than the surveillance somehow. You've been listening to my private conversations. I've been keeping you alive, Victor corrected, his voice sharp. And if you walk out that door tonight, if you go to that restaurant with a man who can't protect you, you won't make it through dinner before Castellano's people make their move. Her phone buzzed again. Everything okay? Still planning to meet? Poor David. Normal, harmless David who'd done nothing except ask out the wrong woman and walk unknowingly into a war he couldn't see. This is insane, Elena whispered. This is all... I'm a secretary. I file papers and answer phones and organize your schedule. Why would anyone... Because you're not just a secretary. Victor's free hand came up, his knuckles brushing her cheek in a gesture so tender it felt like violence in context. You're the woman who knows where every dollar flows and every body's buried. You're the one who types the contracts and schedules the meetings and knows the difference between my legitimate businesses and the ones that fund them. You're brilliant and loyal, and you notice everything, and that makes you either my greatest asset or my most dangerous liability. His thumb traced her lower lip, and she stopped breathing. And sometime in the last 2 years, he continued, his voice dropping to something rough and raw, you became the only thing in this world I'm afraid to lose. The confession hung between them, too big and too true and too late. You should have told me, Elena said, her voice breaking. If I was in danger, if people were watching me, you should have... What? Warned you? Victor's laugh was bitter. Told you that working for me had painted a target on your back? That would have been the responsible thing, wouldn't it? The right thing. Let you make an informed choice about whether the salary was worth the risk. Yes, she said. That's exactly what you should have done. And you would have quit. Not a question. A certainty that sat heavy in his voice. You would have walked away, found a safe job with a safe boss, and I would have lost the only person in this building who gives a fuck whether I eat lunch or sleep more than 4 hours, or remember that human beings occasionally need to pretend they're something other than machines designed to accumulate power. The raw honesty of it cut through her anger, leaving something more complicated in its wake. Because he wasn't wrong. If she'd known, really known, the danger 6 months ago or a year ago, she would have run, would have chosen safety over whatever this was between them. But now, standing here with his hand on her face and her wrist burning under his grip, and the truth laid bare between them, She wasn't sure running was what she wanted anymore. "You still should have told me," she said quietly. "I deserve to know." "You're right." Victor's hand dropped from her face, but he didn't let go of her wrist. "You deserved honesty. You deserved a choice. You deserved a boss who could keep his professional distance and not turn into a possessive bastard the moment you put on a red dress." Despite everything, Elena felt her lips twitch. Is that what this is? Possessiveness? Among other things. His eyes burned into hers. "Cancel the date, Elena." And then what? She needed to understand the full shape of what he was offering. "I go home alone under Marcus's watchful eye. I come back to work Monday and pretend this conversation never happened. I spend the next 2 years being grateful you're keeping me alive while I watch you date models and socialites who don't know your real business." Something flashed across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she'd noticed, that she'd cared. "I don't date," Victor said carefully. "I attend functions with appropriate companions who understand the arrangement is purely professional." "How romantic." "Romance is a luxury I can't afford." But his thumb was drawing circles on the inside of her wrist, betraying the lie. "Romance makes you soft, makes you vulnerable, makes you do stupid things like tap phones and assign security details and lose your fucking mind when the woman you—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "When the woman you what?" Elena pressed, her heart hammering. She needed to hear him say it, needed the truth spoken in clear words instead of coded confessions and implied possession. Victor's eyes met hers, and for one moment the mask dropped completely. No authority, no control, no carefully maintained distance. Just want and fear, and something that looked terrifyingly close to love staring back at her from the face of the most dangerous man she'd ever known. When the woman you can't stop thinking about decides to kiss someone else. The world narrowed to the space between them, his hand on her wrist, her pulse racing against his fingers, the red dress that had started all this hanging between them like a declaration of war. "I'm not your property," Elena repeated, but the words had lost their conviction. "No," Victor agreed. "You're something far more dangerous. You're my choice. And I'm asking you, no, fuck it, I'm begging you, don't walk out that door tonight. Don't go to that restaurant. Don't put yourself in danger because you're trying to prove a point about independence." "And if I stay?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "What happens if I choose this? Choose you? Then I tell you the complete truth." Victor's voice was steady, but she felt his pulse racing against her skin where they touched. "I show you exactly who I am and what I've done and what I'm still doing. I give you all the ugly details I've spent 2 years hiding behind quarterly reports and legitimate business fronts. And then you decide, with full knowledge of exactly what kind of man I am, whether you can live in my world or if you need to walk away from it entirely." It was the most honest offer he could make. Total transparency in exchange for an informed decision. No more lies by omission, no more protection through ignorance. Just the brutal truth, and whatever came after. Elena's phone buzzed a third time. Getting worried. Should I just head home? She looked at the message, then at Victor, then at the door 3 feet away that represented safety and normalcy, and a life without bodyguards and wiretaps, and crime families plotting her kidnapping. She thought about David waiting at the restaurant. David with his easy smile and his marketing job and his ordinary, uncomplicated life. David who would probably propose within a year and want 2 kids and a house in the suburbs with a golden retriever. David who represented everything she thought she wanted when she was 23 and naive enough to believe safety and passion were compatible. Then she looked at Victor Moreau, at the silver threading through his dark hair and the scars on his knuckles she'd never asked about, and the eyes that saw through every defense she'd ever built. At the man who'd killed to protect his empire and probably would again. At the danger and the power and the terrible, intoxicating honesty of someone who wanted her badly enough to drop every pretense and beg. She should choose David, should choose safety, should run as fast and far as her heels would carry her from the beautiful monster offering her a place in his darkness. Instead, Elena pulled her wrist free from Victor's grip, not to flee, but to take control of the moment. She picked up her phone and typed quickly, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what she was doing. Something came up. "I'm sorry, but I need to cancel. I hope you have a wonderful night." She hit send before she could second-guess the decision, before she could calculate the risks or weigh the consequences, or do any of the logical things that had kept her alive this long. David's reply came within seconds. "Oh no, everything okay?" "Yes, just complicated." She hesitated, then added, "Take care, David." She blocked his number before he could respond. Clean break? No second chances. No room for her to wake up tomorrow and regret burning this particular bridge. When she looked up, Victor was watching her with an expression that made her knees weak. Triumph and relief and hunger, all wrapped together in a look that promised complications she couldn't begin to imagine. "Now what?" Elena asked, her voice surprisingly steady for someone who'd just set fire to her normal life. "Now," Victor said, moving toward his office with absolute confidence that she'd follow. "You learn exactly who I am. Everything I've done, everyone I've destroyed, every reason you should walk away and never look back." He paused at the doorway, looking back at her over his shoulder. "And then you decide if you're brave enough to stay anyway." Elena followed him into the office, her red dress bright as blood against the dark wood and expensive leather. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking or a confession booth sealing, trapping them together with the truth that had been building for 2 years of careful distance and controlled desire. The office looked the same as always, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern art that probably cost 6 figures, the massive desk where she'd spent countless hours reviewing contracts and scheduling meetings. But tonight it felt different, charged with possibility and danger and the weight of whatever came next. Victor poured 2 glasses of scotch from the crystal decanter on his sidebar, handing her one without asking if she wanted it. The assumption of intimacy in the gesture wasn't lost on her. "Where do you want me to start?" he asked, settling against his desk with the glass cradled in one hand. "With my father and how I inherited this empire? With my first kill? With the bodies buried under construction sites across the city? With the politicians I own, or the judges I've bought, or the federal agents I have on payroll?" Elena took a sip of the scotch, letting it burn down her throat, buying time to organize her thoughts. "Start with the truth about why you hired me." Victor's smile was sharp. "Smart question. Most people would want the dramatic details, but you go straight for the manipulation." "Was I?" she pressed. "Hired because I was qualified, or hired because you needed someone you could control?" "Both." He took a drink, his eyes never leaving her face. "You were overqualified for the position. Harvard MBA, working as an executive assistant was my first clue you were running from something. Your resume showed 3 months at a consulting firm, followed by 6 months unemployment before applying here. That kind of gap usually means trauma or trouble." "Trauma," Elena confirmed quietly. The car accident that had killed her fiancé and left her too broken to function in her old life. The grief that had driven her to this city where no one knew her story. "He died. I couldn't. Everything reminded me of him. I needed to start over somewhere new." "I know." Victor's voice softened fractionally. "I had you investigated before I brought you in for the first interview. I knew about Michael, about the accident, about the fact that you'd been planning a wedding when the drunk driver crossed the median. I knew you were brilliant and damaged and looking for a place to disappear. That made you perfect." The clinical assessment of her grief should have been offensive, but Elena understood his logic. A brilliant woman running from tragedy would work hard, ask few questions, and be grateful for the distraction. She'd been exactly what he needed. "And the danger?" Elena asked. "When did I become a target?" "The Kozlov incident," Victor confirmed. "Until then, you were just very good at your job. Efficient, discreet, trustworthy. But that night, when they took Sarah..." He stopped, his jaw tightening at the memory. Elena remembered. Sarah Chen, Victor's corporate attorney and the closest thing he had to a friend. Her 16-year-old daughter had been grabbed after soccer practice by Dmitry Kozlov's people, trying to force Sarah's cooperation in transferring overseas assets. The whole office had been in chaos, Victor cold and furious in a way that made grown men flinch. "You didn't panic," Victor continued. "Everyone else was useless, too scared or too shocked to function. But you walked into my office, put a list of Sarah's known associates and the daughter's schedule on my desk, and asked what you could do to help. No hysteria, no moral judgment, just practical assessment of the situation." "She needed help," Elena said simply. "Her daughter needed help. The why didn't matter as much as the how. Exactly. Victor's smile was grim. That night, I realized you weren't just competent. You were capable of functioning in crisis, of making hard choices under pressure, of understanding that in my world, sometimes survival matters more than morality. Did you find her? Elena had never asked before, too afraid of the answer. Yes. Single word, carrying weight. Sarah's daughter was returned unharmed within 12 hours. Dmitry Kozlov died very slowly over the course of 3 days in a warehouse in Queens. His organization collapsed within a week. No one has attempted a kidnapping since. The casual way he delivered information about torture and murder should have horrified her. Instead, Elena found herself grateful. Grateful that Sarah's daughter had survived. Grateful that Victor was the kind of man who destroyed threats completely and permanently. That reaction, gratitude instead of revulsion, told her everything about how far she'd already fallen into his world without realizing it. And the surveillance started after that, she asked. 6 months after. Victor set down his glass, giving her his complete attention. At first, I told myself it was practical. You knew too much to leave unprotected. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd started noticing other things. The way you laughed at Morrison's terrible jokes to keep office morale up. The way you stayed late when I was buried in negotiations because you knew I'd forget to eat otherwise. The way you learned exactly how I take my coffee and the precise tone of voice that means I'm about to lose my temper. His voice dropped, roughening with honesty. I told myself I was protecting an asset, but I was really protecting someone I was already halfway too obsessed with. The confession settled between them, heavy with implication. When did you know? Elena asked. That it was more than professional interest? Victor laughed, the sound bitter and self-aware. The Morgan acquisition, 11 months ago. You wore that cream-colored suit that should have been completely professional but somehow made you look like every fantasy I'd been suppressing. We were in the conference room for 18 hours straight, hammering out terms, and around hour 14 you fell asleep in your chair, just tipped over mid-sentence and passed out from exhaustion. Elena vaguely remembered that night. The endless negotiations, the coffee that stopped working around midnight, the way Victor had eventually sent everyone home except her because she was the only one who understood the full scope of what they were trying to accomplish. I carried you to the couch in my office, Victor continued, covered you with my jacket, and I stood there watching you sleep and I realized I was completely fucked because I didn't just want to protect you or control you or even just fuck you, though I definitely wanted that too. I wanted to know what you dreamed about, what made you happy, what would make you look at me like I was something other than a monster pretending to be a businessman. The vulnerability in his voice was almost painful to hear. Victor Moreau admitting to want and fear and the kind of longing that turned powerful men into fools. You sent me home at sunrise, Elena remembered, told me to take the day off. Because if you'd woken up in my office, if you'd seen the way I was looking at you. He stopped, shaking his head. I needed distance, needed to remember why getting involved with you was the worst possible idea. And yet here we are. Elena took another sip of scotch, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. What changed? Why break your own rules tonight? That fucking dress. Victor's voice was rough. 2 years of beige and gray and navy, 2 years of professional distance, and you show up in red planning to let some other man peel it off you. I lost my mind. David was never going to peel off my dress, Elena said quietly. It was a first date. Coffee would have been more appropriate, but he suggested dinner and I wanted to feel normal for a few hours. Wanted to pretend I was someone who could date a marketing executive and talk about quarterly projections without thinking about the blood money funding them. But you don't want normal. Victor pushed off the desk, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. If you wanted normal, you would have quit after the Kozlov incident, after you saw exactly what kind of man I am and what I'm capable of doing to protect what's mine. Instead, you stayed, made yourself indispensable, learned to navigate my world like you were born to it. He took the scotch glass from her hand, setting it aside with his own, then caught her wrist again. That same careful grip, thumb pressing against her racing pulse. So tell me, Elena, why did you really stay? And don't tell me it was the salary or the health insurance or because you needed the distraction from grief. Tell me the truth. His eyes burned into hers, demanding honesty to match his own confessions. Elena took a breath, steadying herself for the admission that would change everything. Because I wanted to see if you'd eventually notice me. If you'd ever look at me like I was something other than a very efficient assistant. If you dropped the professional distance and acknowledge what was happening between us every time we were alone in a room together. I noticed you the day you interviewed, Victor said roughly, walked in wearing that terrible Navy suit that was 2 sizes too big, and looked me in the eye when I asked about your gap in employment. Most people lie or deflect. You told me your fiancé died and you weren't ready to talk about it yet. No apology, no excuse, just honesty and a warning that you had boundaries even in a job interview. His free hand came up, fingers threading through her hair with careful possession. I hired you despite knowing you were trouble, despite knowing I'd spent every day fighting the urge to cross lines I had no business crossing. And I've been in my own personal hell for 2 years watching you be brilliant and loyal and completely off limits. I was never off limits, Elena whispered. You just chose to see me that way. Because getting involved with you meant making you a target. Victor's grip tightened fractionally in her hair. Not painful, but possessive. Meant exposing you to every enemy who'd love to hurt me through someone I care about. Meant risking your safety for my selfish fucking want. That's not a choice I make lightly. But you're making it now. She could feel his breath against her face, see the barely controlled hunger in his eyes. Why now? What changed? You put on that dress and planned to give some other man something that should be mine. His voice dropped to something dangerous and intimate. And I realized I'd rather face every consequence of claiming you than spend one more night knowing you're in someone else's arms. The possessiveness should have been offensive, should have made her pull away and remind him she wasn't property to be claimed. Instead, it sent heat flooding through her body, pooling low in her belly with want that had been building for 2 years of denial. Then claim me, Elena said, the challenge clear in her voice. No more half-truths or controlled distance or pretending this is professional. You want honesty? Here's mine. I've been in love with you since you carried me to your couch and covered me with your jacket and looked at me like I was something precious instead of just useful. So stop talking about consequences and show me what happens when Victor Moreau stops being careful. For one heartbeat, he was completely still. Then his mouth was on hers, and careful disappeared entirely. The kiss was claiming and furious, and nothing like the restrained control she associated with everything else about him. His hand fisted in her hair, angling her head exactly where he wanted it, and his other arm locked around her waist, hauling her against him until no space existed between her red dress and his expensive suit. He tasted like scotch and possession and 2 years of restraint finally breaking. Elena kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer even though physics said they couldn't get any closer. 2 years of wanting and denying and watching him from across conference rooms erupted into this single point of contact, his mouth on hers, demanding and giving in equal measure, destroying every careful boundary they'd maintained. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers and his hands still locked in her hair and around her waist, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Stay, Victor said against her mouth, the word somewhere between command and plea. Not just tonight. Stay in my world, in my life, in my bed. Let me protect you the way you deserve instead of from the shadows. Let me show you everything I am, the monster and the man. And choose me anyway. Elena pulled back just far enough to meet his eyes. And tomorrow? Next week? What happens when the Castellanos make their move or another threat emerges? Do I get to be part of those decisions? Or do I just trust you to handle everything while I smile and schedule appointments? You get to be my partner. Victor's voice was absolute, in business and in bed, and in every decision that affects us both. No more lies. No more protection through ignorance. You want the truth? I'll give you all of it. The empire I've built, the enemies who want me dead, the moral compromises I make every day to stay on top. And in exchange, you give me the same honesty. When you're scared, when you disagree, when you think I'm making a mistake, you tell me. Even when it's hard, even when it challenges me, especially then. It was a better offer than she'd expected, real partnership instead of protected possession, trust instead of control, even though control was the foundation of everything else in his world. And if I can't live with what you show me, Elena had to ask, if the truth is too much? Something painful flashed across his face. Then I let you go. Give you enough money to disappear somewhere safe, somewhere my enemies can't find you, protect you from a distance for the rest of your life, and live with knowing I lost the only thing that ever mattered more than power. The raw honesty of it stole her breath. He meant it. Would actually let her walk away if she couldn't handle his world, even though letting go was probably the hardest thing Victor Moreau had ever done. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said firmly, but I need you to understand something. I'm choosing this with my eyes open, choosing you, choosing danger, choosing a life where I'll probably never sleep easy again. So when things get hard, and they will get hard, you don't get to protect me by pushing me away or making decisions for me. We face it together, or not at all. Victor's smile was fierce and possessive and absolutely devastating. Together, he agreed, starting with the Castellano problem. They're planning to move against you within the next 72 hours. We have a narrow window to either eliminate the threat or make it clear that touching you means declaring war. Lena's pulse kicked up, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, the sharp awareness of stakes suddenly rising to life or death levels. What are you suggesting? That we send a message? Victor's eyes glinted with dark promise. That you're not a secretary who can be easily taken. You're Victor Moreau's woman, and anyone who touches you dies screaming. The casual violence of the statement should have horrified her. Instead, Elena felt something hot and primal surge through her chest. Protection, yes, but also claiming. Victor marking his territory in blood and making sure every enemy knew exactly what she meant to him. How? She asked simply. His smile sharpened. I'm going to take you to dinner at Lucia's, the restaurant where you were supposed to meet David. We're going to walk in together, and I'm going to make it very clear to everyone watching, and they will be watching, that you're under my protection. Then we're going to let the Castellanos make their move, and I'm going to show them exactly what happens to people who threaten what's mine. You want to use me as bait, Elena said slowly. I want to use us as bait, Victor corrected. They're expecting you alone and vulnerable. Instead, they'll find us together, armed, prepared, and ready to end this permanently. By tomorrow morning, the Castellano family will be a cautionary tale, and every other organization in this city will know that coming after you means coming after me. It was insane, dangerous, the kind of plan that could get them both killed if anything went wrong. But it was also decisive, final, and exactly the kind of ruthless efficiency she'd watched Victor employ for 2 years against every threat to his empire. We'll need backup, Elena said, her mind already working through logistics. Marcus, obviously. Who else? Victor's expression shifted to something that looked dangerously close to pride. See? This is why I'm half in love with you. No hesitation, no panic, just straight to tactical planning. Half? Elena raised an eyebrow, the challenge clear. Fully, he corrected, pulling her close again. Completely. Irrevocably. But I'm trying to maintain some dignity here. Elena laughed despite the insanity of planning a mob hit while standing in her boss's arms wearing a red dress. Dignity is overrated. Now tell me the full plan so I know what I'm agreeing to. Victor kissed her again, quick and fierce and full of dark promise. Then he walked her through exactly how they'd turn a dinner date into a declaration of war, and Elena listened, absorbing every detail, understanding that this was her final chance to choose safety over chaos. She didn't hesitate. By the time they left the office 2 hours later, the plan was set. Marcus and 3 other men were briefed and in position, and Elena had traded her red dress for body armor under a designer coat that cost more than her monthly rent. Victor's hand rested on the small of her back as they walked to his car, possessive and protective and public in a way he'd never allowed before. They were going to Lucia's, going to face the Castellanos, going to end this threat and start whatever came next. Together, the drive to Lucia's took 17 minutes through streets that glittered with Friday night energy. Couples heading to shows, groups spilling out of bars, the ordinary chaos of people living ordinary lives. Elena watched the city slide past the bulletproof windows of Victor's Mercedes, hyper-aware of the weight of the vest under her coat and the gun Marcus had insisted she carry tucked into a holster at her side. You know how to use that? Victor had asked when Marcus produced the weapon. Michael taught me, she'd answered, checking the safety with practiced efficiency. He He was paranoid about me living alone in the city. Made me take classes at a range in Brooklyn until I could hit center mass at 20 yards. Victor's expression had shifted to something complicated. Grief that she'd lost someone who loved her enough to teach her survival. Satisfaction that she wouldn't be helpless if things went wrong. Possessive fury that another man had touched her even in memory. He hadn't said any of it out loud, just nodded and watched her check the ammunition with the kind of attention that made her skin feel too tight. Now his hand rested on her thigh, thumb drawing absent circles through the fabric of her dress pants. She'd changed into something more practical, black slacks and a silk blouse that wouldn't restrict movement if she needed to run or fight. The intimate touch should have been distracting, but instead it anchored her. Reminded her that whatever happened in the next hour, she wasn't facing it alone. "They'll make contact before we enter the restaurant," Victor said, his voice calm and clinical despite the violence they were planning. "Probably in the parking lot. 2 or 3 men, armed but trying to look casual. They'll want to separate us, get you into a vehicle, neutralize me if I resist." "And when they try?" Elena kept her voice steady, refusing to let fear bleed into her words. "Marcus takes the one on the left, Chen handles the right. I deal with whoever comes for you." Victor's fingers tightened fractionally on her leg. "But Elena, if anything goes wrong, if you see an opening to run, you take it. Don't wait for me, don't try to help, just get to safety and let me clean up the mess." She turned to look at him fully, studying the hard lines of his face in the dashboard lights. "We're partners, remember? That means I don't run while you fight my battles." This isn't about partnership, it's about keeping you alive." His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping with tension. "If they get their hands on you—" "They won't," Elena interrupted. "Because we're going to be smart and brutal and finish this before they understand what hit them. That's the plan, right? Overwhelming force, no hesitation, complete elimination of the threat?" Victor's smile was sharp enough to cut. "You've been paying attention. I've been working for you for 2 years. I know how you handle problems." She paused, then added quietly, "I also know you're terrified right now. That under all this tactical planning and cold efficiency, you're scared of what might happen to me." His hand left her thigh to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Terrified doesn't begin to cover it. I've faced down rival families and federal investigations and assassination attempts without breaking a sweat. But the thought of you getting hurt because of me—" He stopped, his voice roughening. "I'd burn this entire city down if anything happened to you." The raw honesty of it made her chest tight. "Then let's make sure that doesn't happen. Let's end this tonight and move forward without looking back." Victor kissed her, quick and fierce and full of promises he couldn't make but would die trying to keep. Then the car was slowing, turning into the parking lot of Lucia's, and there was no more time for reassurance or second-guessing. The restaurant looked exactly like it had in the photos David had sent. Upscale Italian, white tablecloths visible through the windows, soft lighting that suggested romance instead of violence. Elena's stomach twisted thinking about the normal date she'd planned. The ordinary evening that would have ended with a polite kiss and maybe plans for a second dinner. That life felt impossibly far away now, separated from her current reality by the weight of the gun at her side and the dangerous man whose hand found hers as they exited the vehicle. 3 cars, Victor murmured, his eyes scanning the lot with professional assessment. Black Escalade at 2 o'clock, silver Lexus near the entrance, dark sedan by the service exit, Castellanos people plus backup in case we brought company. "Which we did," Elena said, spotting Marcus's familiar profile in a vehicle 2 rows over. Chen would be somewhere less obvious, watching angles, ready to move the moment things went sideways. "Stay close to me," Victor said, his hand moving to the small of her back as they walked toward the restaurant entrance. His body shifted subtly, positioning himself between her and the Escalade in a move so practiced it had to be instinct. Protecting her even while using her as bait. The contradiction would have been funny if her heart wasn't trying to beat out of her chest. They made it 5 steps before the doors of the Escalade opened. 3 men emerged with the kind of synchronized precision that screamed military training or serious mob muscle. All 3 wore expensive suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of weapons underneath. The one in front was tall and broad with the kind of face that had stopped too many punches. Nose crooked, scar tissue around his eyes, the flat expression of someone who'd done terrible things and would do them again without hesitation. "Mr. Moreau," the man said, his voice carrying the rough edges of a Brooklyn accent. Wasn't expecting to see you here tonight. Clearly. Victor's tone was pleasant, almost friendly, which Elena had learned meant he was at his most dangerous. I don't believe we've been introduced. You are? Tommy Castellano. The name landed like a grenade. Not a soldier, but family. Which meant this was bigger than they'd anticipated, the Castellanos sending blood instead of hired muscle. My uncle Angelo sends his regards. How thoughtful. Victor's hand stayed steady on Elena's back, keeping her anchored against his side. Though I'm afraid we're just here for dinner. Romantic evening, you understand. Perhaps another time for business discussions. Tommy's smile didn't reach his eyes. See, that's the thing, Mr. Moreau. We were hoping to borrow your lovely companion for a conversation. Just a few questions about some financial irregularities we've noticed in your quarterly reports. Nothing personal. Everything about my companion is personal, Victor said softly, and Elena felt the shift in his body, muscles coiling, weight redistributing, the predator preparing to strike. So I'm afraid I'll have to decline your request. That's disappointing. Tommy took a step forward, his backup flanking him in a classic intimidation formation. Because we weren't really asking. The parking lot suddenly felt very small and very exposed. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward the gun at her side, but Victor's fingers tightened on her back in warning. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. You should know, Victor continued in that same pleasant tone that promised bloodshed, that threatening my woman is the same as threatening me. And I don't respond well to threats, Tommy. Ask your uncle about the Kozlov incident if you need historical context. Something flickered in Tommy's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or the first edge of doubt. The Kozlov incident had become legend in certain circles, the kind of cautionary tale that kept ambitious families from overreaching. Dmitry Kozlov had taken something that belonged to Victor, and 3 days later his entire organization was dismantled and distributed among more cooperative parties. Ancient history, Tommy said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Besides, Angelo's made arrangements in case you try something stupid. Insurance policies, you might say. People who care about your operations. Judges, politicians, certain federal prosecutors who've been very helpful in keeping investigations away from your door. Victor went very still. Are you threatening to expose my business relationships? I'm suggesting that cooperation would benefit everyone involved. Tommy's smile widened. You let us have a conversation with your secretary here. Get the information we need about your offshore accounts, and everyone goes home happy. You refuse, and by Monday morning, every friendly judge and bought politician in this city gets a very detailed file about their financial connections to your empire. It was a good move, maybe the only move that could hurt Victor more than direct violence. Losing his political protection would leave him exposed to investigations he'd spent years preventing. The FBI would descend like wolves, and even with his legal team, some charges would stick. He'd survive, probably, but his empire would be crippled. Elena felt Victor's calculation, the cold assessment of costs and benefits and acceptable losses. She also felt the moment he made his decision, not the smart one, not the tactical retreat that would protect his business interests, but the one that put her safety above everything else. No, Victor said simply. Tommy's expression darkened. You're choosing this bitch over your entire operation? Over everything you've built? I'm choosing my woman over anything and everything you threaten to take. Victor's voice dropped to something lethal. And if your uncle has a problem with that, he can take it up with me directly instead of sending his nephew to grab secretaries in parking lots. The insult landed hard, calling Tommy an errand boy, dismissing Angelo's authority, reducing their entire play to a coward's move. Elena saw murder flash across Tommy's face and knew they'd run out of time for talking. Last chance, Moreau, Tommy growled, his hand moving toward his jacket. Give us the girl, or what? Victor interrupted. You'll shoot me in our public parking lot 50 feet from a restaurant full of witnesses? You'll start a war with my organization while you're still scrambling to consolidate your uncle's territory? You'll make a move so monumentally stupid that every family in this city will know the Castellanos are weak? Tommy's hand froze on his jacket. Around them, the parking lot had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded violence, when predators sized each other up and calculated survival odds. Here's what's going to happen, Victor continued, his voice carrying absolute authority. You and your men are going to get back in your vehicle and drive away. You're going to tell Angelo that Elena Ward is off limits permanently. And if I ever, and I mean ever, see another Castellano within 100 yards of her, I will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly. You can't threaten us, Tommy blustered, but Elena heard the uncertainty underneath. I'm not threatening you, Victor corrected. I'm explaining reality. You wanted to know about financial irregularities in my quarterly reports? Here's what you missed. I own 40% of the real estate in this city's financial district. I control the unions that run your construction sites. I have connections to every major port on the eastern seaboard, which means I decide what shipments get inspected and what slides through customs without scrutiny. He took a step forward, and Elena felt power radiate off him like heat. Your uncle is a mid-level operator trying to play in the big leagues. I am the league, and you just threatened the one thing in this world I value more than power. So yes, Tommy, I'm absolutely willing to burn my entire empire to ash if that's what it takes to keep her safe. The question is, are you willing to bet your uncle's operation on whether I'm bluffing? The silence stretched. Elena could see Tommy calculating, weighing Victor's reputation against Angelo's orders, trying to determine if the man in front of him was serious about scorched earth warfare over a secretary. Then Marcus stepped into view from behind the Escalade, his gun already drawn and pointed at Tommy's head. Chen materialized near the Lexus, covering the backup team. And a third man Elena didn't recognize emerged from the restaurant entrance, blocking the only clear exit route. Looks like you brought friends, Tommy said, his voice tight. I always bring friends to dinner, Victor replied easily. It's a dangerous city. Now, you were leaving? For one heartbeat, Elena thought Tommy would be stupid enough to draw his weapon anyway, thought this would end in blood and bullets, and the kind of violence that marked territory in permanent ways. She felt her own hand drift toward the gun at her side, muscle memory from Michael's training overriding fear. Then Tommy stepped back, his hands rising in a gesture of surrender that fooled absolutely no one. This isn't over, Moreau. Yes, Victor said flatly. It is. Tell your uncle I'll be visiting him tomorrow to discuss terms for the Castellano family's immediate withdrawal from my territory. And Tommy? He waited until the other man met his eyes. If anything happens to Elena, if she gets a threatening phone call, or finds a tracking device on her car, or even receives a suspicious piece of mail, I will assume Angelo is responsible and act accordingly. Make sure he understands the stakes. Tommy's jaw clenched, but he nodded once before turning toward the Escalade. His backup followed, moving with the careful precision of men who knew they'd lost this round, but weren't ready to concede the war. Within 30 seconds, all three vehicles were pulling out of the parking lot, leaving Victor and Elena standing in the artificial silence of averted violence. Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline crash, the body's response to danger narrowly avoided. Victor's arm came around her waist, solid and grounding, pulling her against his side. You okay? His voice had lost its lethal edge, softening into something closer to concern. I'm fine, Elena managed, then laughed shakily. That was terrifying, Victor supplied. Reckless? Monumentally stupid on my part? I was going to say exhilarating. She turned to look at him, still processing what had just happened. You were willing to destroy everything for me. Your business, your political connections, your entire empire. Why? Victor's hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone in the gesture that was becoming familiar. Because empires can be rebuilt. Political connections can be reestablished. But you... His voice roughened. You're irreplaceable, Elena. And I meant what I said. I'd burn this whole city down before I let anyone hurt you. The declaration should have been frightening in its intensity. Instead, it felt like safety, the absolute certainty that Victor Moreau, for all his violence and moral compromise, would protect her with everything he had. They're going to retaliate, Elena said, forcing herself to think tactically instead of emotionally. Maybe not tonight, but Angelo won't let that challenge stand unanswered. I know. Victor glanced toward where Marcus and Chen were conferring quietly near their vehicle. Which is why we're accelerating the timeline. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with Angelo to offer him a choice. Peaceful withdrawal from my territory with generous compensation, or complete destruction of his organization within 72 hours. He'll never take the deal, Elena said with certainty. Men like Angelo don't back down from challenges, especially public ones. Then we'll destroy him. Victor said it matter-of-factly, like they were discussing quarterly projections instead of mob warfare. His operation is already weak. Too much expansion too fast, not enough infrastructure to support it. 3 well-placed moves and the whole thing collapses. Elena recognized the tone, the same cold calculation he used for hostile takeovers and business acquisitions. Except this time, the target was a crime family, and the stakes were measured in blood instead of stock prices. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Victor's expression shifted to something that looked like pride mixed with concern. "I need you to go somewhere safe while I handle this. Somewhere the Castellanos can't find you, with security I trust completely. Just for a few days while I clean up the mess." "Absolutely not." Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes directly. "We're partners, remember? I don't hide while you fight my battles. If you're going to war with the Castellanos, I'm part of the strategy sessions and tactical planning. That's non-negotiable." "Elena," Victor started, his voice carrying the edge of command he probably used to win arguments. "No," she interrupted. "You don't get to make unilateral decisions about my safety anymore. You promised me honesty and partnership. That means I get a voice in how we handle threats, even when you're terrified something will happen to me." For a long moment, Victor just looked at her, taking in her set jaw and determined expression and the stubborn fire in her eyes that said she wouldn't back down on this. Then he smiled, sharp and proud and absolutely devastating. "Fine," he conceded, "but you're staying at my place where I can keep you close, and you're carrying that gun at all times. And if I tell you to run or hide or get behind me, you do it without argument. Those are my terms." "Deal," Elena agreed, because those were reasonable compromises that didn't involve her being stashed away like delicate china while Victor faced danger alone. "Now, can we actually eat dinner? I'm starving, and it seems wasteful to let a perfectly good reservation go to waste." Victor laughed, genuine amusement breaking through the tension. "You want to have dinner after almost getting kidnapped in the parking lot?" "I want to prove that we're not running scared from Angelo Castellano's threats," Elena corrected. "We came here for dinner, so we're having dinner. Let everyone watching see that Victor Moreau and his woman aren't intimidated by parking lot confrontations." Something hot and possessive flashed in Victor's eyes at the phrase "his woman." "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Constantly," Elena confirmed. "You should probably get used to it now." Victor kissed her again, harder this time, claiming and possessive and full of dark promise. When he pulled back, his smile was dangerous. "Marcus Chen, stay on the perimeter. Anyone approaches who isn't waitstaff, you handle it quietly. We're having dinner." If the hostess at Lucia's thought it strange that they arrived with visible security and the tension of people who'd just survived a potential kidnapping, she was too professional to mention it. She seated them at a corner table with good sightlines to the entrance, brought water and menus, and disappeared with the kind of discretion that suggested she understood exactly what kind of clientele the restaurant served. Elena studied her menu without really seeing the words, her mind still processing the rapid escalation from office confrontation to mob warfare in the span of 3 hours. This morning, she'd been planning a normal date with a normal man. Now she was sitting across from Victor Moreau, preparing to help him destroy a rival crime family. "Having second thoughts?" Victor asked quietly, watching her with those too perceptive eyes. "No," Elena said honestly, "just adjusting. This morning I was a secretary. Tonight I'm your partner in what I'm assuming is about to become a very complicated situation. That's a significant change in status." "You were never just a secretary," Victor corrected. "You were the woman I trusted with everything important, the one who knew where every skeleton was buried and every dollar was hidden, the one who could have destroyed me at any point in the last 2 years and chose loyalty instead." He reached across the table, catching her hand in his. "The only thing that's changed is that we've stopped pretending there's professional distance between us. Everything else, the trust, the partnership, the fact that I'd do anything to keep you safe, that was already true. We're just being honest about it now." Elena turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "And tomorrow, when you meet with Angelo? What's the play?" I offer him $10 million to withdraw from my territory and cease all operations that compete with my interests. He refuses because men like Angelo see compromise as weakness. Then I systematically dismantle every revenue stream his organization depends on, while simultaneously exposing him to federal investigation. Victor delivered the strategy with clinical precision. Within a week, he'll be fighting on 3 fronts: my people, his own rivals smelling blood, and the FBI. His organization collapses, I acquire his most profitable operations, and the Castellano family becomes a cautionary tale about overreach. And if he moves against me first, Elena had to ask, uses me as leverage before you can implement that strategy? Victor's expression went hard. Then I skip the subtle approach and kill everyone in his organization until there's no one left to threaten you, starting with Angelo and working my way down through every soldier, associate, and connected family member until the Castellano name is a memory. The casual way he discussed mass murder should have been horrifying. Instead, Elena felt something warm and primal settle in her chest. Safety, she realized. The absolute certainty that Victor would protect her with overwhelming violence if necessary. That's Plan B, I assume, she said dryly. Plan B is significantly messier and attracts more federal attention, Victor confirmed. But yes, if they touch you, subtlety goes out the window and I become the monster they should have been too smart to provoke. Their waiter arrived before Elena could respond, taking their order with professional efficiency and retreating quickly. Left alone again, Elena found herself studying Victor in the soft restaurant lighting, taking in the sharp lines of his face and the silver threading through his dark hair and the eyes that had seen too much violence but still somehow looked at her with devastating tenderness. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Just thinking about how different tonight was supposed to be," Elena admitted. "I was going to have dinner with David, talk about normal things like weekend plans and favorite movies, maybe hold hands across the table and feel butterflies when he walked me to my car. And instead, you're planning mob warfare with a man who just threatened to burn the city down for you," Victor finished. "Having regrets?" "Not even a little," Elena said honestly. "David would have been safe and comfortable and completely wrong for me. I didn't realize it until tonight, but I've been choosing the wrong kind of men my whole life. Men who made sense on paper, but never made me feel like this." "Like what?" Victor's thumb traced patterns on her palm, the intimate touch at odds with their public setting. "Like I'm finally awake after years of sleepwalking through my own life," Elena said. "Like I'm choosing danger and passion and uncertainty over safety and comfort and slow death by boredom. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, even though where I'm supposed to be includes gunfights in parking lots and federal investigations." Victor's smile was slow and devastating. "You know what's going to happen when we get back to my place, don't you?" Heat flooded through Elena's body at the promise in his voice. "I have some idea. I'm going to spend the rest of the night proving that choosing me, choosing this life, was the right decision," Victor continued, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate. "I'm going to make you forget David and every other safe choice you've ever considered. And tomorrow, when we face Angelo and whatever comes next, you'll know exactly what you're fighting for." The words sent electricity down her spine. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Moreau." "It's a promise, Mrs. Ward." His eyes burned into hers. "And I always keep my promises." Dinner passed in a haze of excellent food and increasingly heated glances. Elena barely tasted the pasta she'd ordered, too focused on the way Victor looked at her across the table, like she was the only thing in the room worth his attention, like he was counting the minutes until they could leave and he could make good on the promises burning in his eyes. They made it through the main course before Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening, then showed Elena the screen. "Angelo wants a meeting. Tonight. Says he's willing to negotiate." Elena's pulse kicked up. "It's a trap." "Probably," Victor agreed, "but also an opportunity. If I can get him to the negotiating table before he has time to plan a proper retaliation, I might be able to end this without extensive bloodshed." "You don't trust him," Elena observed. "Not even a little," Victor confirmed. "But I trust my ability to see a trap coming and turn it against him. The question is whether you're comfortable with me taking the meeting while you stay here with Marcus." Elena considered. The smart play was obvious. Let Victor handle the negotiation while she stayed in a public place with security. But Smart had never gotten her anywhere worth being. I'm coming with you, she said. Victor's jaw tightened. Elena? Partners, she reminded him. You don't face Angelo alone, and I don't hide in restaurants while you walk into potential danger. Those are my terms. Take them or spend the next hour arguing about something we both know you're going to lose. For a moment, she thought he'd pull rank or make demands or fall back on authority. Instead, he smiled, sharp and proud and full of the same reckless need that had driven him to challenge the Castellanos in a parking lot. Fine, Victor said, but you stay behind me, follow my lead, and if shooting starts, you get behind cover and let the professionals handle it. Deal? Deal, Elena agreed, her heart racing with equal parts terror and exhilaration. Victor signaled for the check, paid cash that probably covered the meal 3 times over, and stood with the fluid grace of a predator preparing to hunt. Elena rose beside him, adjusting the weight of the gun at her side and squaring her shoulders. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. Marcus and Chen fell into formation as they exited the restaurant, creating a protective barrier around them as they crossed the parking lot. The city glittered around them, Friday night energy undiminished by the violence lurking under its surface. Where's the meeting? Elena asked as they reached Victor's car. The old Castellano restaurant in Little Italy, Victor said, sliding behind the wheel. Neutral ground, supposedly. Lots of witnesses, public enough to discourage open warfare. And actually, perfect location for an ambush if Angelo's decided negotiation is weakness, Victor admitted. But also the kind of power move where he can't afford to look scared. He invited me to his family's territory, which means he has to provide safe passage or lose face with everyone watching. Elena processed the chess match implications. So we're betting on his pride being stronger than his pragmatism. Oh, exactly, Victor confirmed, the car purring to life. Welcome to my world, Elena, where survival depends on reading people better than they read themselves. The drive to Little Italy took 20 minutes through streets that grew progressively older and more worn, the modern glass and steel giving way to brownstones and family restaurants that had survived generations of changing neighborhoods. Elena watched the city transform, understanding for the first time how many different worlds existed within these streets, how many invisible borders divided territory and power and control. Victor's hand found hers again as they drove, thumb tracing her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar over the course of a single evening. The intimacy of it still made her breath catch, this casual claiming, this assumption of connection that said she belonged beside him in whatever came next. Last chance to change your mind, Victor said quietly as they pulled onto Mulberry Street. I can still have Marcus take you somewhere safe. Not a chance, Elena said firmly. We're doing this together. Victor's smile was fierce and proud. Then let's go negotiate with a man who wants us both dead and see if we can convince him that's a terrible idea. The restaurant sat on a corner that had probably looked exactly the same for 70 years. Red awning faded by sun and time, hand-painted sign declaring Castellano's family, Italian in gold letters that were chipping at the edges, windows foggy with decades of cooking steam and cigarette smoke. It was the kind of place that survived on reputation and loyalty, rather than Yelp reviews, where the pasta was made fresh every morning and the back room had hosted more criminal conspiracies than the FBI could ever prove. Victor parked half a block away, his eyes scanning the street with professional assessment. 4 men outside, probably 6 more inside. Angelo will have backup in the kitchen and near the exits. He's expecting trouble. So are we, Elena said, checking her gun one final time before tucking it back into the holster. Her hands were steady now, the initial adrenaline surge settling into focused clarity. Fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest, but it was manageable, useful even, keeping her sharp and aware. Marcus appeared at Victor's window, his expression grim. Chen's covering the back exit. I'll be at the front. You sure about this, boss? Feels like walking into a trap. It's definitely a trap, Victor agreed. The question is whether Angelo's smart enough to let me walk back out of it. My money's on his pride overriding his pragmatism. He glanced at Elena. Stay close, follow my lead, and if things go sideways, get behind me and let Marcus do his job. I know the drill, Elena said, then added more softly, be careful. Victor's smile was quick and fierce. Careful's overrated. Effective is what matters. He kissed her hard and fast, a claiming that tasted like danger and promise, then opened his door. "Let's go have a conversation with a dead man walking." The confidence in his voice should have been arrogance, but Elena recognized it as something else, absolute certainty in his ability to control the situation regardless of Angelo's plans. Victor Moreau had spent 20 years surviving in a world where one mistake meant death, and he hadn't survived by being lucky. He'd survived by being smarter, more ruthless, and completely willing to escalate violence beyond what his enemies expected. Angelo Castellano had made the mistake of thinking Victor's careful control meant weakness. Tonight, he'd learned the difference. The men outside the restaurant straightened as Victor and Elena approached, hands drifting toward concealed weapons in the universal body language of hired muscle, preparing for trouble. Elena recognized the type, not family, but professional enforcers who got paid to look intimidating and occasionally break bones. Dangerous if you were civilian, manageable if you knew what you were doing. Victor walked past them like they were furniture, his hand on Elena's back guiding her toward the entrance with casual authority that said he owned the space regardless of whose name was on the awning. One of the guards moved to block the door, then thought better of it when Marcus materialized behind them with the kind of smile that promised recreational violence if anyone was stupid enough to start something. Inside, the restaurant was exactly what Elena expected. Red leather booths along the walls, checkered tablecloths on the tables, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce thick enough to taste. Sinatra played from speakers that probably predated CDs, and the lighting was dim enough to make everyone look like they had secrets, which, in this neighborhood, they probably did. The dinner crowd had been cleared out, or maybe never existed on a Friday night when the boss needed the space for business. The only people visible were more guards positioned near the kitchen and bathrooms, and an older man sitting alone in a corner booth with a glass of red wine and the kind of face that belonged on wanted posters. Angelo Castellano was 70 if he was a day, with silver hair slicked back from a face that had probably been handsome before violence and age carved it into something harder. He wore a suit that cost less than Victor's but still spoke of money and power, and his eyes tracked their approach with the flat calculation of a man weighing whether they'd leave his restaurant alive. "Mr. Moreau," Angelo said, his voice carrying the rough texture of someone who'd spent decades smoking cigars and giving orders. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. And you brought your lovely secretary. How unexpected." The way he said secretary made it clear he knew exactly what Elena was. The woman Victor had publicly claimed in a parking lot, the leverage Angelo thought he could use. "Elena's my partner, not my secretary," Victor corrected, his voice pleasant but carrying steel underneath. "She goes where I go. I hope that's not a problem." Angelo's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all. Please sit. Can I offer you wine? The Chianti's excellent." "We're fine," Victor said, sliding into the booth across from Angelo with Elena beside him. His arm went around her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and possessive, making sure everyone watching understood exactly what she meant to him. Angelo studied them for a long moment, his gaze moving from Victor's face to Elena's and back again. "You made quite a scene at Lucia's tonight. My nephew tells me you threatened war over this young lady." "Your nephew threatened to kidnap my partner," Victor corrected. "I simply explained the consequences of following through on that threat. I don't consider that unreasonable." "No?" Angelo took a sip of his wine, the picture of casual authority in his own territory. "From my perspective, you killed 3 of my men in the parking lot." "I didn't kill anyone," Victor interrupted, though I was prepared to if Tommy had been stupid enough to draw his weapon. "Your men left with their lives because I chose to show restraint." "You're welcome." The correction landed like a slap. Angelo's jaw tightened fractionally, the only sign that Victor's casual dismissal of his authority had landed. "Nevertheless, you've created a situation that requires resolution. You claim this woman is off limits, but her position in your organization makes her a legitimate target for intelligence gathering." "Elena knows nothing about my business operations," Victor lied smoothly, the words delivered with such absolute conviction that Elena almost believed them herself. "She schedules appointments and organizes files. Kidnapping her would gain you nothing except my focused attention on destroying everything you've built." Angelo laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "We both know that's not true, Mr. Moreau. Your secretary has access to information that could unravel your entire empire. Financial records, offshore accounts, client lists, all the details you've worked so hard to keep away from federal scrutiny. She's a vulnerability you can't afford. Then you should be very concerned about making me choose between protecting my empire and protecting her, Victor said quietly. Because I promise you, Angelo, I will choose her, every single time. And when I do, what happens to your organization won't be business, it'll be personal. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Elena felt Victor's body coiled tight beside her, ready to move if Angelo gave the signal. She became hyper-aware of the guards positioned around them, the distance to the nearest exit, the weight of the gun at her side that suddenly felt inadequate against this many armed men. "You're willing to destroy everything for one woman?" Angelo asked, genuine curiosity threading through his voice. "That seems remarkably foolish for a man of your intelligence." "It's not foolish," Victor said. "It's clarity. I've spent 20 years building an empire, making strategic compromises, prioritizing power over personal attachment, and I've been fucking miserable the entire time. Elena represents the first thing in 2 decades that matters more than quarterly profits or market share or political influence. So yes, I'm absolutely willing to burn my entire operation to ash before I let you use her against me." Elena's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. This wasn't tactical maneuvering or negotiation strategy. This was Victor Moreau speaking the truth regardless of how it made him look, admitting weakness to an enemy because honesty mattered more than appearing strong. Angelo's expression shifted, something almost like respect flickering across his features. "You really mean that?" "Well, every word," Victor confirmed. "Which brings us to why you called this meeting. You wanted to see if I was bluffing about protecting her. Now, you know I'm not. So let's talk about what happens next." "What happens next," Angelo said slowly, "is that you compensate my organization for the disrespect your actions caused. $3 million, delivered by Monday, and a public acknowledgement that the Castellano family is entitled to operate in territories we've claimed." Victor's laugh was sharp and utterly without humor. "You think I'm going to pay you for the privilege of you not kidnapping my partner? That's not negotiation, Angelo. That's extortion, and I don't respond well to extortion." "Then we have a problem," Angelo said, his voice hardening, "because I can't let tonight's event stand unanswered. You embarrassed my nephew, threatened my family, and made it clear you value this woman over business relationships that took years to establish. That kind of disrespect requires consequences, or I look weak to every other family watching this situation. So, save face by taking my money?" Victor shook his head. "No. Here's my counteroffer. You withdraw from my territory immediately. Cease all operations that compete with my interests. In exchange, I won't destroy your organization over the next 72 hours. That's the deal. Take it or prepare for war." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, too large and too final for anything except complete acceptance or total rejection. Elena watched Angelo's face cycle through emotions, fury at being dictated to, calculation as he weighed his options, and finally a cold acceptance that Victor wasn't someone he could intimidate or negotiate into submission. "You're serious," Angelo said flatly. "Completely," Victor confirmed. "I've already identified 12 revenue streams your organization depends on. By Monday morning, I can cut off 10 of them. By Wednesday, your suppliers will refuse to work with you because I'll make it more profitable to starve you out. By Friday, your own lieutenants will be looking for employment elsewhere because they'll see the writing on the wall." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something lethal. "And while all that's happening, I'll be having conversations with certain federal prosecutors about evidence I've been collecting regarding your family's involvement in labor racketeering and customs fraud. Evidence that would be very interesting to the FBI's Organized Crime Division." Angelo's face went tight with fury. "That's a death sentence. You're threatening to destroy my entire family over a woman." "I'm offering you a way to survive with dignity and tact," Victor corrected. "Withdraw from my territory, stop competing with my interests, and I have no reason to pursue your destruction. It's actually quite generous considering you sent men to kidnap Elena." "And if I refuse?" Angelo's hand moved slightly on the table, and Elena caught the shift in posture from the guards around them, preparing for violence, waiting for the signal. "Then I demonstrate why threatening people I love is the fastest way to a shallow grave," Victor said simply. His own body remained relaxed, but Elena felt the coiled tension underneath, the predator recognizing the moment before the strike. For one heartbeat, the restaurant held its breath. Elena's hand drifted toward her gun, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. She could see the calculation in Angelo's eyes, the weighing of pride against survival, the choice between backing down or starting a war he couldn't win. Then Angelo smiled, sharp and dangerous and not at all friendly. "You've got balls, Moreau. I'll give you that. Walking into my place and threatening me in my own territory takes either massive courage or massive stupidity." "I prefer to think of it as clarity of purpose," Victor said. "I know what I'm protecting and exactly how far I'm willing to go. That makes the decision-making process very simple." Angelo took another sip of wine, drawing out the moment. "Let me tell you a story, Mr. Moreau. 30 years ago, I was where you are now, young, powerful, building an empire. And I fell in love with a woman who wasn't part of this life. Beautiful, intelligent, everything I thought I wanted." His expression went distant, remembering. "My rivals saw her as a vulnerability. They tried to use her against me, force my hand through threats and intimidation. So I made a choice. I could protect her by keeping her close, making her part of my world, teaching her to survive in the shadows. Or I could protect her by letting her go, sending her away where my enemies couldn't touch her." "Which did you choose?" Elena asked quietly, the first time she'd spoken since entering the restaurant. Angelo's eyes met hers, and she saw genuine pain behind the hard exterior. "I sent her away. Gave her money, a new identity, a life far from this city, and everything I represented. And for 30 years I've lived with knowing I chose power over love. Chose the empire over the one person who actually mattered." He turned his attention back to Victor. "So when I see you sitting here ready to burn everything down for this woman beside you, part of me thinks you're a fool. But another part, the part that remembers what it felt like to actually give a damn about someone, respects the hell out of your choice." The admission shifted something in the room. Elena felt the tension ease fractionally, saw the guards relax their ready positions. Angelo wasn't agreeing to Victor's terms, but he also wasn't preparing to kill them. Not yet, anyway. "I'm not sending Elena away," Victor said firmly, "and I'm not giving up my empire. I'm going to have both, even if that means remaking the rules of how power works in this city." "That kind of ambition gets people killed," Angelo warned. "You can't protect her and maintain your empire. Eventually, you'll have to choose." "Then I'll deal with that when it comes," Victor said. "But tonight, the choice is yours. Accept my terms and survive with your dignity intact, or refuse and watch me systematically destroy everything you've spent 40 years building. Those are the only two options on the table." Angelo was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the wine glass in a rhythm that probably meant he was thinking. Elena watched him weigh the options, saw the moment pride warred with pragmatism, and survival instinct kicked in. "You'll leave my family's legitimate businesses alone?" Angelo asked finally. "The restaurants, the construction company, the waste management contracts. Those stay ours. As long as they don't compete with my interests or operate in my territory," Victor confirmed. "I'm not trying to erase the Castellano name from the city. I'm just establishing clear boundaries about what belongs to me. And my nephew? Tommy's going to want revenge for tonight. Tommy can want whatever he likes as long as he doesn't act on it," Victor said flatly. "If he comes after Elena or me, I'll consider it a violation of our agreement and respond accordingly. Make sure he understands those stakes." Angelo nodded slowly, the gesture carrying weight. "And the evidence you mentioned? The files you'd give to federal prosecutors?" "Insurance," Victor said. "As long as you honor our agreement, they stay buried. The moment you violate our terms, they become public record. Consider it motivation to keep your word." It was brilliant strategy, not just defeating an enemy, but converting them into someone with a vested interest in maintaining the peace. Angelo couldn't move against them without triggering his own destruction, which meant he'd become an unwilling enforcer of the very boundaries Victor was establishing. "You've thought this through," Angelo admitted grudgingly. "I've had a long time to plan for various contingencies," Victor said. "I just never expected to implement the scorched earth protocols over a woman. But here we are." Angelo's gaze moved to Elena, studying her with the kind of attention that made her spine straighten. "You know what you're getting into, young lady. The life he's offering isn't romance and security. It's danger and compromise and living with the knowledge that everything you touch is built on blood money. I know exactly what I'm choosing, Elena said steadily. I've worked for Victor for 2 years. I've seen the empire he's built and the methods he uses to maintain it. I'm not naive about what his world requires or the moral compromises involved, but I'm also not naive enough to think safety and passion are compatible. I'd rather have one real thing than a lifetime of comfortable lies. Something shifted in Angelo's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition of someone who understood the cost of the life they were choosing. You're braver than I gave you credit for. Or more foolish. Time will tell which. Probably both, Elena said, and was rewarded with a dry laugh. Angelo finished his wines, set the glass down with careful precision, then met Victor's eyes. Fine. I'll withdraw from your territory and cease operations that compete with your interests. But I want $5 million in compensation for the contracts I'm terminating and the business I'm walking away from. Consider it a goodwill payment to smooth this transition. $2 million, Victor countered. Paid over 6 months to ensure you're honoring our agreement. If you violate the terms at any point, payments stop immediately. $3 million, paid over 3 months, Angelo said. And you provide protection if any of my rivals try to move into the vacuum I'm creating by pulling back. Victor considered for a moment, running the numbers and strategic implications. $3 million over 4 months, and I'll make it known that the Castellano family is under my protection for contracted services. Anyone who moves against you answers to me. That's my final offer. Angelo extended his hand across the table. Deal. Though I think we're both going to regret this arrangement at some point. Probably, Victor agreed, shaking his hand with the kind of firm grip that sealed agreements in their world. But regret beats war, and we both have better things to do than kill each other over territory disputes. The handshake held for a long moment, two predators acknowledging mutual respect, even as they remained fundamentally opposed in nature. Then Angelo released Victor's hand and sat back, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. You should leave before my people decide to test whether I'm serious about this arrangement, Angelo said. And Mr. Moreau? Take care of her. If you're going to burn your empire for this woman, at least make sure she's worth the sacrifice. She is, Victor said with absolute certainty. His hand found Elena's under the table, lacing their fingers together. Every risk, every consequence, every enemy I make protecting her, she's worth all of it. The declaration sent warmth flooding through Elena's chest, despite the restaurant full of armed men and the danger they were still navigating. Victor meant it, not as romantic hyperbole, but as fundamental truth about how he'd restructured his priorities. They stood together, Victor's hand moving to the small of her back as they turned toward the exit. Marcus materialized from his position near the door, falling into step behind them as they walked through the restaurant. The guards watched them pass but didn't move to interfere, following Angelo's unspoken command to let them leave alive. The street outside felt like freedom after the claustrophobic tension of the restaurant. Elena took a deep breath of cool night air, feeling her pulse slowly return to normal as they walked toward Victor's car. They'd survived. Not just survived, but won. Walked into enemy territory and walked back out with exactly what they wanted. That went better than expected, Marcus said quietly, once they were out of earshot. Thought for sure we'd have to shoot our way out. Angelo's smarter than Tommy, Victor said. He recognized that pride wasn't worth dying for, and that I was serious about scorched earth warfare if he pushed me. The money helps him save face with his organization. He can claim he negotiated a profitable withdrawal instead of admitting he backed down from a fight. Elena processed the chess match they'd just played. And you get what you wanted without the mess of actually destroying his organization. Plus, you convert a potential enemy into someone with financial incentive to maintain the peace. Exactly, Victor confirmed, his arm going around her waist as they reached the car. Welcome to high-level negotiation in the criminal underworld. It's all about finding ways for everyone to pretend they won while you actually get everything you wanted. They slid into the car, and Victor pulled her close before starting the engine. His kiss was fierce and claiming, tasting like relief and triumph, and the kind of possessive need that said now that the danger was past, he needed to touch her, claim her, make absolutely certain she was safe and his. I thought we were going to die in there. Elena admitted when they finally broke apart. When Angelo's hand moved on the table and all those guards tensed up, I was calculating which ones to shoot first. The ones by the kitchen, Victor said immediately. They had the clearest line of fire and the least cover between them and us. The bathroom guards would have hesitated, giving us time to use the table for cover. He paused, his expression softening. But I wasn't going to let it get that far. If Angelo had given the signal, I would have killed him before his guards could move. Probably would have died in the process, but you would have had time to get out with Marcus. The casual way he discussed sacrificing himself sent ice through her veins. Don't say that. Don't talk about dying to protect me like it's an acceptable outcome. It's the only acceptable outcome if the alternative is you getting hurt, Victor said simply. I told you. I'm all in on this. On us. And that means your safety matters more than mine. No, Elena said fiercely, her hands coming up to frame his face. That's not how this works. We're partners, which means we both get to survive. Both get to build whatever comes next. I didn't choose you just to watch you throw your life away the first time things get dangerous. Victor's expression shifted to something vulnerable and raw. I've never had someone demand I survive before. Usually people are perfectly happy to let me take all the risks. Well, get used to it, Elena said, because I'm going to be very unreasonable about keeping you alive from now on. That's non-negotiable. His laugh was quiet and genuine, the sound of someone discovering they weren't alone in their determination to protect. You're going to be trouble. You already said that, Elena reminded him, and you're still here, so I guess you like trouble. I'm obsessed with trouble, Victor corrected, kissing her again. Specifically the kind that wears red dresses and threatens mob bosses and demands partnership instead of protection. You're going to ruin me, Elena Ward. Promise? She said against his mouth. Absolutely, he confirmed, then finally started the engine. Now, let's get home before I decide to do something highly inappropriate in the front seat of my car, 2 blocks from Angelo's restaurant. The drive back to Victor's penthouse took 30 minutes through city streets that had returned to their normal Friday night chaos. Elena watched the neighborhoods change, Little Italy giving way to the financial district, old brownstones replaced by glass and steel towers that reached toward a sky hazed with light pollution. Somewhere in this city, David was probably having a normal evening with normal friends, completely unaware he'd dodged a bullet by being stood up for dinner. Somewhere else, Angelo was probably explaining to his nephew why they were pulling back from war instead of escalating into bloodshed. And Elena was here, her hand in Victor's, heading toward a life she'd never planned but somehow always been moving toward since the moment she'd walked into his office 2 years ago. Victor's building was exactly what she expected, modern and expensive and secured with the kind of discreet protection that said very important people lived here. The doorman knew him by name, the elevator required a key card for the penthouse level, and the hallway cameras tracked their progress with the efficiency of professional surveillance. His apartment was less expected. Instead of the cold minimalism she'd anticipated, the space felt lived in and comfortable. Leather furniture that showed wear in the right places, bookshelves packed with everything from business strategy to poetry, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he controlled. Art on the walls that looked like actual personal taste instead of expensive decoration. A home instead of a showpiece. You look surprised, Victor said, watching her take in the space. I expected something more... Elena searched for the right word. Austere, like your office. The office is for business. This is where I live. He moved toward the kitchen, pulling out a bottle of scotch. Want a drink? We're celebrating survival and successful negotiation. Celebrating feels premature, Elena said, following him. Angelo agreed to your terms, but that doesn't mean his people will fall in line. Tommy seemed pretty invested in revenge. Tommy will do what his uncle tells him or find himself demoted to running protection rackets in Queens, Victor said, pouring 2 glasses. Angelo's old school. When he gives his word, he keeps it. That's why I was willing to negotiate instead of just destroying him outright. He handed her the scotch, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent electricity up her arm. Besides, we have bigger things to worry about than the Castellanos now. Such as? Elena took a sip, the burn familiar and grounding. Such as what comes next for us. Victor set his glass down, his full attention focusing on her with the intensity that had drawn her to him from the beginning. We've crossed lines tonight that can't be uncrossed, made declarations in front of witnesses. By tomorrow morning, every family in this city will know that Victor Moreau has a weakness named Elena Ward. Is that a problem? She asked quietly. It's a complication, Victor corrected, but not one I regret. The question is whether you're ready for what being my partner actually means. Not just the danger, we've covered that extensively, but the other implications. Elena met his eyes steadily. Such as? Such as moving in here where I can keep you safe instead of maintaining your apartment across town. Such as being seen publicly as my woman instead of my secretary. Such as learning the full scope of my operations so you can actually function as my partner instead of just having access to the paperwork. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. Such as sharing my bed and my life and accepting that I'm going to be unreasonably possessive about both for the foreseeable future. Heat flooded through Elena's body at the implications. That sounds like you're asking me to marry you without actually proposing. I'm asking you to choose this life with full knowledge of what it requires, Victor said. Marriage comes later after you've had time to make sure you can actually live with who I am. But everything else, the partnership, the protection, the claiming, that starts tonight if you're willing. It was the most honest offer she'd ever received. No pretty lies about safety or promises he couldn't keep, just the raw truth that choosing Victor Moreau meant danger and compromise, and accepting that she'd become a target for everyone who wanted to hurt him. Yes, Elena said simply, to all of it, the partnership, the protection, the unreasonably possessive claiming. I'm in, Victor, completely. His kiss was answer and claiming and promise all wrapped together. He backed her against the kitchen counter, his body pressing against hers with deliberate intent, his hands framing her face like she was something precious he needed to memorize through touch. You're sure? He asked against her mouth, giving her one final chance to choose safety over chaos. I've never been more sure of anything, Elena confirmed, her own hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer, even though physics said they couldn't get any closer. Now stop asking and show me what happens when Victor Moreau stops being careful. His smile against her lips was pure predator. That's going to be my favorite order you've ever given me. Then careful disappeared entirely, and Elena learned exactly what it meant to be claimed by a man who'd spent 2 years holding back and had finally decided restraint was overrated. Morning came too early and not early enough. Sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that Elena had forgotten to close before Victor had carried her to bed sometime around 3 in the morning. She woke wrapped in expensive sheets, and Victor's arm anchored possessively around her waist, his breath warm against her neck in a way that made her entire body remember exactly how they'd spent the hours between leaving Angelo's restaurant and finally collapsing into exhausted sleep. Elena shifted carefully, not wanting to wake him, but needing to see his face in daylight, to confirm that last night had actually happened. The confrontation, the negotiation, the claiming that had felt like falling and flying simultaneously. Victor's grip tightened reflexively, even in sleep, pulling her closer, and she smiled at the unconscious possessiveness that apparently didn't shut off just because he wasn't awake. Stop thinking so loud, Victor murmured against her shoulder, his voice rough with sleep. It's too early for tactical analysis. How do you know I'm thinking tactically? Elena asked, her fingers tracing patterns on his forearm where it crossed her stomach. Because I can feel the tension in your body, and you only get that particular flavor of tense when you're working through strategic implications. He pressed a kiss to her neck that sent heat spiraling through her. So either you're regretting last night or you're trying to figure out what comes next. I'm hoping it's the second one. Definitely the second one, Elena confirmed. Though what comes next covers a lot of territory. Do I still have a job? Am I still your secretary, or did that position get eliminated somewhere between the parking lot confrontation and you demonstrating exactly how thorough you are about keeping promises? Victor's laugh was warm against her skin. You're still employed, though the job descriptions changed significantly. I'm thinking something along the lines of strategic partner with benefits or chief operations officer who happens to share my bed and occasionally threatens mob bosses. Very professional, Elena said dryly. I'm sure HR will love that title. We don't actually have HR, Victor reminded her. We have Marcus, who handles personnel issues by glaring at people until they comply. and Chen, who thinks employee satisfaction means nobody's gotten shot this week. I doubt either of them will object to unconventional job titles. Elena turned in his arms, needing to see his face for this conversation. I'm serious, Victor. If we're actually doing this, partnership in business and in bed, we need clear boundaries about how it works. I can't be effective as your strategic partner if everyone thinks I'm just sleeping with the boss. Something shifted in his expression, the playfulness fading into genuine consideration. You're right. So here's what we do. Monday morning, I call a staff meeting and announce that you're being promoted to Chief Operating Officer with full authority over daily operations and strategic planning. Your salary triples, you get your own office, and everyone understands that when you give orders, they're coming from me. That's going to cause resentment, Elena pointed out. Half the senior staff has been with you for years. They're not going to accept me as COO just because you say so. Then they can leave, Victor said flatly. Anyone who can't respect your authority doesn't belong in my organization. Besides, you've been functioning as my de facto COO for the last year anyway. You know my business better than anyone except me. You've negotiated contracts, managed crises, and kept the entire operation running smoothly. The only thing that's changing is the official recognition and compensation. He cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone in the gesture she'd come to recognize as his tell for emotional honesty. I need you beside me, Elena. Not behind me taking notes or managing my schedule, but actually beside me making decisions and shaping strategy. That means you need real power in the organization, not just proximity to mine. The offer was more than she'd expected. Actual partnership instead of decorative companionship. Authority that didn't depend on their personal relationship. It was also terrifying in its implications because accepting meant fully committing to his world with all its moral compromises and dangerous complications. What about the legitimate businesses versus the less legitimate ones? Elena asked carefully. Where do the boundaries exist? And how much am I expected to know or participate in the parts that could land us in federal prison? Victor's expression went serious. That's a conversation we need to have in detail, but here's the fundamental answer. You get to choose your level of involvement. The legitimate operations are completely yours if you want them. Real estate development, import-export, the consulting firm. Those are profitable, legal, and don't require moral flexibility. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. The other side, the parts that fund the legitimate operations and maintain my political influence, I can keep you separate from those if you prefer. You'd know they exist, know generally how they function, but you wouldn't be making decisions or giving orders that directly involve criminal activity. That's a firewall I can maintain if it makes you more comfortable. Elena considered the offer and what it meant. Victor was giving her the option to stay clean while benefiting from dirty money, to maintain plausible deniability if everything collapsed and federal prosecutors came calling. It was generous and practical, and also completely contrary to the partnership she'd demanded. No, she said finally. If we're actually partners, I need to know everything. How the money flows, where the bodies are buried, which politicians are on the payroll, and which judges look the other way. I can't make informed strategic decisions if I'm operating with partial information. Elena, Victor started, concern threading through his voice. I'm not naive, she interrupted. I know what I'm asking for. Complete knowledge means complete complicity. It means if you go down, I probably go down with you. But that's the deal, right? We're in this together. The legitimate business and the criminal enterprise, the strategic planning and the moral compromises, all of it. I won't be your partner with an asterisk. Victor looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. You understand what you're accepting, that full knowledge means you become a target not just for my enemies, but for federal prosecution if they ever build a case? That protecting you becomes infinitely more complicated when you're not an innocent bystander? I understand, Elena said steadily, and I'm choosing it anyway. I'd rather face consequences as your actual partner than live safely on the sidelines pretending I don't know exactly what funds my salary. His kiss was fierce and claiming and tasted like relief. When he pulled back, his smile was sharp with pride and possession. You're going to be magnificent at this. Terrifying and brilliant and completely ruthless when necessary. I learned from the best, Elena said, then pushed up on one elbow to look at him properly. So what's the actual plan? How do we transition from secretary and boss to partners running a criminal empire disguised as legitimate business interests? Victor sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist, and Elena took a moment to appreciate the view. All that controlled power and carefully maintained muscle. The scars she'd mapped with her hands last night finally visible in daylight. Evidence of violence survived and battles won, proof that Victor Moreau hadn't built his empire without paying for it in blood. We start with the legitimate operations, Victor said, his mind clearly shifting into strategic mode. You take over day-to-day management of the real estate portfolio. That's 12 properties worth about $40 million total. The import-export company runs itself mostly, but you'll want to review their contracts and understand the supply chains. The consulting firm is basically a front for client development, but it generates enough legitimate revenue to justify its existence. He stood, moving toward the windows with unconscious grace, and Elena followed with her eyes. Those 3 businesses give you complete access to our financial records, client lists, and operational procedures. You'll spend the next month learning every detail, not just the surface operations, but the actual function they serve in the larger ecosystem. And the less legitimate operations? Elena asked, pulling the sheet around herself as she sat up. Those require more careful introduction, Victor said, turning back to face her. The basics you already know. We control most of the port traffic on the eastern docks, which means we decide what gets inspected and what gets waived through customs. That's worth about $15 million annually in fees from importers who value discretion. He moved back toward the bed, sitting on the edge with the kind of casual intimacy that said he was completely comfortable in his own skin. We have arrangements with 3 construction unions that guarantee our projects get priority labor and avoid strikes or delays. That saves us maybe $5 million a year in costs and timing, which translates to higher profits on development deals. Elena processed the information, fitting pieces together. And the political connections? The judges and prosecutors Angelo mentioned? Maintained through a combination of legitimate campaign contributions and less legitimate incentives, Victor admitted. Nothing as crude as direct bribes. That's how you get caught. Instead, we provide valuable intelligence about their opponents, fund independent expenditure campaigns that benefit them, and occasionally make problems disappear before they become public scandals. In exchange for? Elena pressed. Favorable rulings on zoning disputes, timely dismissal of nuisance lawsuits, and strategic blindness when certain shipping containers arrive without proper documentation. Victor's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering information about corruption like he was discussing quarterly earnings. It's the cost of doing business at this level. Everyone pays into the system. We just do it more efficiently than most. The casual admission of systematic corruption should have been shocking. Instead, Elena found herself analyzing the strategic efficiency of the approach, understanding how Victor had built an empire that was simultaneously legitimate enough to survive scrutiny and criminal enough to generate the capital needed for rapid expansion. And the violence? She asked quietly. The parts that involve killing people like Dmitry Kozlov? Victor's expression went hard. Reserved for direct threats that can't be neutralized through negotiation or financial pressure. I don't kill for pleasure or entertainment. I kill when someone threatens my operations or the people I protect, and diplomatic solutions have failed. Kozlov kidnapped a 16-year-old girl. The Castellanos tried to grab you. Those aren't business disputes. They're acts of war that require permanent solutions. How many people have you killed? The question came out before Elena could stop it, needing to know the full scope of what she was accepting. Personally, 11 over the last 20 years. Victor's voice was steady, unflinching. Indirectly, through orders I've given? Probably 30 more. All of them were people who posed existential threats to my organization or hurt someone under my protection. None of them were innocent, though I recognize that's a rationalization that wouldn't hold up in court. The honesty was brutal and somehow reassuring. Victor wasn't trying to minimize or justify, just stating facts about the cost of maintaining power in his world. 41 deaths over 20 years, less than Elena had feared, but still enough to cement his reputation as someone who followed through on threats. Do you regret any of them? She asked. Victor considered the question seriously. 3. 2 were young men who probably could have been brought into the organization instead of eliminated, but I was less patient 20 years ago and made decisions based on fear instead of strategy. The 3rd was a woman who betrayed me to a rival family. I ordered her death, and later learned she'd been coerced through threats against her children. That one still bothers me. The admission of regret made him more human somehow, proof that violence hadn't completely desensitized him to the cost of his decisions. Elena filed the information away, understanding that Victor Moreau was capable of ruthlessness and remorse in equal measure. "What happens now?" she asked, bringing the conversation back to immediate logistics. "Angelo agreed to withdraw from your territory, but that creates a vacuum. Other families are going to notice and try to move in." "Already handled," Victor said with satisfaction. "I made calls last night while you were sleeping. The Irish are taking over the Castellanos' waste management contracts, the Russians are getting their construction sites in Brooklyn, and I'm absorbing their port operations directly. By Monday, the territory is divided and defended before anyone else can make a move." Elena's mind raced through the implications. "You're giving away assets to maintain peace." "I'm trading short-term profits for long-term stability," Victor corrected. "The Irish and Russians get enough to feel like they won something. I get control of the most valuable operations, and everyone has incentive to maintain the new arrangement. Plus, I'm establishing myself as someone who rewards cooperation. That's worth more than money in this business." "And if someone decides to challenge the arrangement anyway," Elena pressed, "then I demonstrate why cooperation is preferable to conflict," Victor said simply. "But I don't expect challenges. The families I brought into the arrangement are rational actors who understand that working with me is more profitable than working against me. That's the foundation of stable power, making allies dependent on your success." It was brilliant strategy wrapped in brutal pragmatism, exactly the kind of chess match thinking that had built Victor's empire. Elena found herself simultaneously impressed and disturbed by how naturally he maneuvered through violence and negotiation like they were equivalent tools in his arsenal. "I need coffee before we continue this conversation," Elena said, standing and looking around for something to wear. Her clothes from last night were scattered across the bedroom floor in a trail that told the story of Victor's thorough demonstration of possessive claiming. "Do you have a shirt I can borrow, or should I do the walk of shame in yesterday's outfit?" Victor's smile was wicked. "You're welcome to walk around naked. I certainly won't complain." "Coffee first, exhibitionism later," Elena said firmly, though she couldn't help smiling. "Shirt?" He stood, pulling a t-shirt from his dresser and tossing it to her. The fabric was soft and worn and smelled like him, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely Victor that she'd spent the night learning to identify. She pulled it on, the hem falling to mid-thigh, and caught his expression shifting to something possessive and hungry. "You're wearing my clothes in my apartment looking thoroughly claimed," Victor said, his voice rough. "That's doing things to my self-control that aren't compatible with having important conversations about business operations." "Then I guess you'll have to practice restraint," Elena said, though she felt heat flood through her at the way he was looking at her. "We have actual planning to do, and I can't think clearly when you're—" She didn't finish the sentence because Victor had crossed the space between them, his hands framing her face as he kissed her with the kind of intensity that made strategic planning seem vastly overrated. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Coffee," Victor agreed, his voice rough with want. "And then planning. And then I'm going to peel that shirt off you and demonstrate exactly why restraint is overrated." Elena laughed, despite the heat pooling in her belly. "You're impossible." "You like impossible," Victor said, catching her hand and pulling her toward the kitchen. "Otherwise, you would have gone on that date with David and lived a perfectly boring life in the suburbs with a golden retriever." "I hate the suburbs," Elena said, "and I'm allergic to dogs." "See? We're perfect for each other." Victor started the coffee maker with practiced efficiency, then turned to face her. "Seriously, though, are you okay with everything we discussed? The scope of the operations, the moral complexity, the fact that you're now complicit in criminal enterprise?" Elena considered the question honestly. "I'm terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Yesterday morning, I was a secretary with a normal life plan. Today I'm agreeing to become COO of a criminal empire and accepting that I'll probably never sleep easy again. That's a significant adjustment." "But you're not running," Victor observed. "No," Elena confirmed, "because running means going back to safe and boring and slowly dying of predictability. I'd rather be terrified and alive than comfortable and numb. Plus," she moved closer, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, I'm choosing you. The man who killed to protect a 16-year-old girl and negotiated peace to protect me and admits when he has regrets. That matters more than the moral complexity. Victor's arms came around her, pulling her against him with the kind of fierce possession that had become familiar overnight. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice. Good, Elena said against his chest, because I'm going to spend the rest of mine making sure you never have to choose between your empire and keeping me safe. We're building something sustainable here. Power and partnership, profit and protection, all of it together instead of in competition. The coffee maker beeped and Victor reluctantly released her to pour 2 cups. They settled at the kitchen island, Elena perched on a stool in his t-shirt, while Victor leaned against the counter, and the domesticity of the moment felt surreal given the conversation they were having about criminal operations and strategic violence. So what's the timeline? Elena asked, cradling her coffee. When do I officially become COO, and how do we handle the transition? Monday morning staff meeting, Victor said. I announce the promotion, explain your new authority structure, and make it clear that anyone with concerns can bring them directly to me. We'll have some resistance. Morrison's been angling for a promotion, and Chen might be upset about being passed over, but they'll fall in line or find employment elsewhere. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes distant with planning. You spend next week shadowing me through meetings and negotiations, learning how decisions get made and where the real power flows. Week 2, you start taking over day-to-day operations while I focus on strategic planning and external relationships. By week 3, you're running the organization with me providing oversight and intervention only when necessary. That's fast, Elena said, her pulse kicking up at the accelerated timeline. It has to be, Victor said. Every day that passes with unclear authority structure is an invitation for internal challenges or external threats. We need to establish your position quickly and decisively. Demonstrate that you have my complete confidence and full backing. That means aggressive timeline and zero tolerance for resistance. Elena processed the plan, finding gaps and potential problems. What about the parts of the organization that don't know about our personal relationship? The legitimate business partners and political connections who think I'm just your secretary? They get introduced to you as my COO and strategic partner, Victor said. Our personal relationship is separate and frankly none of their business. The people who need to know, my inner circle, family allies who might target you, they already know or will know by Monday. Everyone else just sees professional partnership and draws their own conclusions. It was clean separation between public and private, exactly the kind of strategic compartmentalization that would protect them both from excessive scrutiny. Elena appreciated the thought Victor had put into managing perceptions and maintaining operational security. And us? She asked quietly. How do we navigate being partners professionally and personally without one contaminating the other? Victor moved around the island to stand beside her, his hand coming to rest on her thigh where the t-shirt had ridden up. We're honest about potential conflicts of interest. We don't let personal feelings override strategic decisions, and we trust each other enough to disagree professionally without it affecting our relationship. That means you can tell me when I'm wrong in a meeting without worrying I'll be angry later, and I can overrule your decisions when necessary without you taking it personally. That sounds harder than you're making it seem, Elena said. It is, Victor admitted, but we're both smart enough to navigate it. And honestly, I trust your judgment enough that I expect you'll overrule me as often as I overrule you. That's what partnership means. Neither of us has unilateral authority over decisions that affect us both. The confidence in his voice settled something in Elena's chest. This wasn't Victor trying to maintain control while giving her decorative authority. This was genuine partnership with all its messy complications and necessary compromises. Okay, Elena said, decision made. Monday morning, we announce the promotion. I spend next week learning everything I don't already know, and we figure out the rest as we go. That's my girl, Victor said, the possessive endearment making her smile despite herself. Now finish your coffee so I can make good on my promise about demonstrating why restraint is overrated. Elena laughed, but before she could respond, Victor's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, his expression shifting from playful to sharp and dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. What's wrong? Elena asked, recognizing the change immediately. Tommy Castellano just posted bail, Victor said, his voice tight. He was arrested last night on an outstanding warrant. something Angelo arranged to keep him away from us while the negotiation held. If he's out already, it means either Angelo's losing control of his people or Tommy's decided to freelance. Elena's stomach dropped. How much danger are we in? Depends on how stupid Tommy's feeling, Victor said, already moving toward the bedroom. Best case, he goes to ground while Angelo reminds him that violating our agreement means destruction. Worst case, he decides revenge is worth dying for and makes a move before we can neutralize him. What do we do? Elena followed him, watching as he pulled on clothes with efficient speed. We go to the office under heavy security and wait for Tommy to make his play, Victor said, strapping on a shoulder holster with practiced ease. Marcus and Chen are already on alert. I've got 4 more men meeting us at the building. We establish a perimeter and make it clear that coming after us requires going through professional security. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Elena, I need you to stay here while I handle this. It's not about not trusting your capabilities. It's about not giving Tommy an easy target while he's potentially running on rage and stupidity. No, Elena said immediately. We're not doing this. We're not reverting to you making unilateral decisions about my safety the moment things get dangerous. If Tommy's coming for us, we face it together. Elena, Victor started, frustration threading through his voice. Partners, she interrupted. Remember, that means I don't hide in your apartment while you handle threats. Get me body armor and a weapon, and let's go demonstrate why coming after us was the worst decision Tommy Castellano ever made. For a long moment, Victor just looked at her, weighing the risks, calculating the odds, fighting his own instinct to protect her by removing her from danger entirely. Then he smiled, sharp and proud and absolutely devastating. You're going to give me a heart attack before this is over, he said, moving toward his closet. But you're right. Partners means facing danger together. He pulled out a vest similar to the one she'd worn last night. Put this on. And Elena? If shooting starts, you stay behind me until I say otherwise. That's non-negotiable. Deal, Elena agreed, because that was a reasonable compromise between partnership and survival. 20 minutes later, they were dressed for war disguised as business attire. Elena in slacks and a blouse with body armor underneath, Victor in a suit that hid his weapons with practiced ease. They left the penthouse together, Marcus and 2 other men Elena didn't recognize falling into protective formation around them. The drive to the office felt longer than it should have. Every car a potential threat, every pedestrian a possible enemy. Elena's hand stayed near her weapon, muscle memory from Michael's training combining with new awareness of just how dangerous Victor's world really was. Last night had been negotiation with rational actors. Tommy Castellano running on rage was something entirely different, unpredictable, emotional, and potentially suicidal if he'd decided revenge mattered more than survival. Victor's hand found hers in the back seat, his grip steady and grounding. Whatever happens, you follow my lead. Tommy's dangerous because he's got nothing to lose if Angelo's already written him off. That makes him unpredictable. I understand, Elena said quietly. We get to the office, establish security, and wait for him to make his move so we can respond with overwhelming force. Exactly, Victor confirmed. And Elena? I meant what I said last night. If it comes down to choosing between neutralizing the threat and protecting you, I'm choosing you every time. That's not negotiable. Then I guess we'll have to make sure it doesn't come down to that choice, Elena said, squeezing his hand. Because I'm not losing you to some mob enforcer with a grudge and a death wish. Victor's smile was fierce. Together then, like we promised. The office building loomed ahead, glass and steel reflecting morning sunlight, and Elena took a deep breath. Whatever Tommy Castellano had planned, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else in the last 24 hours, as partners who'd chosen danger and passion over safety and comfort. And if Tommy was stupid enough to test them, he'd learn exactly why threatening Victor Moreau's woman was the last mistake anyone made. They made it through the lobby and into the elevator before the first shot shattered the morning calm. The sound was muffled but unmistakable. Gunfire from somewhere above them, followed by shouting and the sharp crack of return fire from what had to be Marcus's team on the upper floors. Victor's hand was on Elena's back instantly, pushing her against the elevator wall while his other hand drew his weapon with practiced speed. Chen, report, he said into the comm unit at his collar, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. 3 hostiles in the parking garage, 2 more trying to breach the 20th floor. Chen's voice crackled back. Tommy's not with them. This is a distraction team. Which means he's planning something else, Victor said, his mind clearly racing through tactical possibilities. Marcus, fall back to the executive floor and establish a perimeter. Elena and I are coming up. The elevator continued its smooth ascent, while gunfire echoed through the building's infrastructure. Elena's pulse hammered against her throat, but her hands were steady as she drew her own weapon, checking the safety and chamber with movements Michael had drilled into her until they became muscle memory. Fear was there, sharp and clarifying, but it didn't paralyze her. Instead, it focused everything down to immediate survival. Victor beside her, threat somewhere above them, and the absolute certainty that they'd face whatever came next together. Tommy's going for the office, Elena said suddenly, the tactical logic clicking into place. He doesn't care about killing your people. He wants to hurt you by destroying something that matters, files, evidence, the control center for your operations. He's going to burn it all. Victor's eyes met hers, and she saw recognition flash across his features. The server room, every financial record, every contract, every piece of evidence linking me to 2 decades of operations. If he destroys that, he cripples my empire, even if he doesn't survive the attempt. Can you access the files remotely? Elena asked, her strategic mind already working through damage control scenarios. Backups exist, but rebuilding from them would take months and leave gaps federal prosecutors could exploit, Victor said grimly. The elevator slowed as they approached the executive floor. We need to stop him before he reaches the servers. The doors opened onto controlled chaos. Marcus and 3 other men had established positions covering the hallway leading to Victor's office, weapons drawn and trained on the stairwell access where sounds of fighting echoed. 2 bodies, Tommy's men, Elena recognized with sick certainty, lay crumpled near the reception desk, evidence that Marcus's team had intercepted the first wave. Status, Victor commanded, moving out of the elevator with Elena close behind him. 6 hostiles neutralized, 2 more pinned in the stairwell, Marcus reported without taking his eyes off his sight lines. But Tommy made it past us. He's in your office with what looks like accelerant and a trigger device. Says he'll burn the whole floor if we try to breach. Victor's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Did he make demands? Just one, Marcus said. He wants to talk to you. Alone. Says he'll destroy everything otherwise. It was exactly the kind of emotional, suicidal play Elena had feared. Tommy wasn't thinking tactically anymore. He was thinking about revenge and legacy, and making Victor Moreau hurt the way he'd been hurt by last night's humiliation. The server room connected directly to Victor's office through a reinforced door that was probably already breached. If Tommy had accelerant and time, he could destroy decades of carefully maintained records before anyone could stop him. I'm going in, Victor said, already moving toward his office. Not alone you're not, Elena said, keeping pace with him. He asked for you, which means he's planning something. If you walk in there by yourself, he either kills you or uses you as leverage to escape. Either way, we lose. Victor stopped, turning to face her with the kind of intensity that said he was about to argue. Elena, if he's wired that office to burn, then we both get out before it does, Elena interrupted. But you don't face him alone. That's not how this works anymore. For one heartbeat, she thought he'd pull rank or make commands or fall back on authority. Instead, he reached out and cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb tracing her cheekbone in the gesture she'd learned meant emotional honesty, regardless of tactical circumstances. If this goes wrong, Victor said quietly, if Tommy decides mutual destruction is acceptable, I need you to promise you'll run. Don't try to save me. Don't try to negotiate. Just get to safety and let Marcus handle the aftermath. No, Elena said firmly. We survive this together or not at all. Those are the only acceptable outcomes. Victor's smile was fierce and proud and edged with the kind of reckless acceptance that said he'd known she wouldn't agree but had needed to try anyway. Then let's go have a conversation with the dead man and see if we can convince him that dying isn't his best option. They approached Victor's office with weapons drawn, Marcus and his team holding position to provide backup if the situation deteriorated. The door stood open, and Elena could smell the sharp chemical tang of gasoline and accelerant, even from the hallway. Tommy had been thorough. If he triggered whatever device he'd rigged, the entire executive floor would become an inferno within minutes. Victor entered first, his body angled to provide some protection if Tommy started shooting. Elena followed close behind, her weapon up and her eyes scanning for threats. The office looked wrong, furniture pushed aside, liquid pooling on the expensive carpet, and Tommy Castellano standing in the center of it all, holding what looked like a modified roadside flare connected to wiring that disappeared into the server room. "Mr. Moreau," Tommy said, his voice rough with something between fury and desperation. "Good of you to join me, and you brought your whore, how touching." "Her name is Elena," Victor said calmly, his weapon trained on Tommy's center mass. "And she's my partner, not my whore. I'd appreciate it if you used the correct terminology when threatening to burn us alive." The casual correction in the face of imminent death would have been funny under different circumstances. Tommy's expression twisted with rage, his hand tightening on the flare. "You destroyed my family," Tommy said, each word carrying the weight of genuine grievance. "Made my uncle look weak in front of everyone who matters. Made me look like a coward who backed down from a fight. And for what? For some secretary you've been fucking?" "I protected someone I love from people who threatened her," Victor corrected. "And yes, I was willing to destroy your organization to do it. I still am, if necessary. The question is whether you're willing to die to prove a point that nobody except you cares about." "My uncle cares," Tommy spat. "He's already planning how to spin this, how to make it look like strategic withdrawal instead of weakness. But everyone knows the truth. Victor Moreau made him back down, made him accept terms, made him look like a coward." "Your uncle made a smart business decision," Victor said. "He recognized that fighting me over Elena would cost more than withdrawing with compensation. That's not weakness, Tommy. That's strategy. Something you might understand if you weren't so busy drowning in wounded pride." Tommy's laugh was bitter and edged with hysteria. "Strategy. You think this is about strategy? You humiliated me in front of my own men, made me look like I couldn't handle a simple kidnapping. My uncle had to bail me out of jail because you got me arrested on bullshit charges to keep me away from your negotiation." "Angelo had you arrested to prevent you from doing exactly this," Victor said, his voice hardening. "Because he knew you'd let emotion override tactical thinking and do something monumentally stupid like wiring my office to explode. He was trying to save your life, Tommy. You should probably start appreciating that instead of throwing it away for revenge." Elena watched the exchange, her weapon still trained on Tommy, but her mind racing through possible approaches. Tommy was spiraling, hurt and angry, and looking for a way to matter in a world where he'd been reduced to a footnote in someone else's negotiation. That made him dangerous, but it also made him vulnerable to the right kind of manipulation. "What do you want?" Elena asked quietly, drawing Tommy's attention. "Really want, not just burning Victor's files and dying in the process. What outcome would actually satisfy you?" Tommy's gaze swung to her and she saw calculation beneath the rage. "I want what he took from me. Respect, fear, the knowledge that crossing me has consequences." "Then you're going about this completely wrong," Elena said, lowering her weapon fractionally in a gesture of de-escalation. "Burning Victor's office and dying in the process doesn't make you respected. It makes you a cautionary tale about what happens when emotion overrides intelligence. Is that really the legacy you want?" "Better than being the coward who backed down," Tommy said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "Who says you backed down?" Elena pressed. "From where I'm standing, you made Victor Moreau nervous enough to bring his entire security team to the office on a Saturday morning. You penetrated his defenses, got past professional bodyguards, and made it into his inner sanctum with enough accelerant to destroy everything he's built. That's not cowardice, Tommy. That's tactical brilliance." She could see Victor watching her from the corner of her eye, understanding where she was going with this, and trusting her enough to let her run with it. "What are you saying?" Tommy asked suspiciously. "I'm saying you've already won the respect and fear you wanted," Elena said. "Every person in this building knows Tommy Castellano came within inches of burning Victor Moreau's empire to the ground. That's a reputation you can build on if you're smart enough to walk away alive." "Walk away?" Tommy's grip on the flare tightened. "So Moreau can hunt me down later? So my uncle can kill me for violating the agreement? There's no walking away from this." "There is if I allow it," Victor said quietly. "Elena's right. You've demonstrated capabilities I underestimated. That's valuable intelligence that changes how I assess threats. So here's my offer. You put down the flare, walk out of this building alive, and leave the city permanently. In exchange, I tell your uncle you died in the assault on my office. You get to start over somewhere else with your reputation intact, and I get my files and office undamaged. It was a lifeline disguised as negotiation, giving Tommy exactly what he'd wanted, a way to matter, to be respected, to walk away from this situation without looking weak. Elena held her breath, watching Tommy process the offer and weigh his options. "Why would you let me go?" Tommy asked. "I tried to destroy your empire." "Because Elena convinced me that killing you costs more than it's worth," Victor said. "You're Angelo's nephew, which means your death violates our agreement and potentially reignites conflict I just spent considerable effort avoiding. But more than that, you're not actually my enemy. You're a kid who got caught between pride and pragmatism and made the choices your position required. I can respect that even if I can't allow it to continue." The admission of respect landed differently than threats or violence would have. Tommy's expression shifted, some of the desperate rage fading into something closer to calculation. Elena could see him working through the implications, understanding that this was probably his only chance at survival. "If I take your offer," Tommy said slowly, "how do I know you won't hunt me down later?" "Because I don't waste resources on threats that have been neutralized," Victor said. "You leave the city, you stop being my problem. As long as you stay gone and don't cause me future complications, you get to live whatever life you build somewhere else. That's the deal. Take it or die here trying to prove a point nobody will remember in 6 months." Elena watched the moment Tommy made his decision. His shoulders dropped fractionally, the tension bleeding out of his posture as survival instinct finally overrode wounded pride. His hand loosened on the flare, though he didn't drop it yet. "I want money," Tommy said. "Enough to actually start over, not just survive. And I want it today, before your people or my uncle's people decide I'm too much of a liability." 50,000 in cash, Victor countered. "More than enough to relocate and establish yourself somewhere new. I'll have it delivered within the hour." 100,000, Tommy pushed back, "and a clean ID that doesn't trace back to Castellano connections." Victor considered for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. 100,000 and documents that give you a fresh start. But the moment you use those resources against me or my interests, the deal's void and I hunt you down personally. Understood?" "Understood," Tommy agreed, finally setting the flare down on Victor's desk with careful precision. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, the reality of how close he'd come to dying finally hitting him. Victor kept his weapon trained on Tommy while gesturing for Marcus to enter. "Get him out of here. Take him to the safe house in Brooklyn, give him the cash and documents, then put him on a bus heading west. I don't care where he ends up as long as it's not within 500 miles of this city." Marcus moved forward, his expression neutral, but Elena caught the flash of respect in his eyes as he guided Tommy toward the exit. "Come on, kid. Let's get you out of here before you change your mind and do something else stupid." As they left, Elena finally lowered her weapon, her hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. The office reeked of gasoline and fear, but the files were intact, the servers undamaged, and somehow they'd all survived. Victor was beside her instantly, his hands framing her face as he checked for injuries with the kind of thoroughness that said he needed to confirm she was actually okay. That was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever seen, talking down a man wired to explode by appealing to his ego. "It worked, didn't it?" Elena said, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempt at steadiness. "He didn't want to die. He wanted to matter. I just gave him a way to do both." "You gave him exactly what he needed to hear," Victor corrected, pulling her against him in a hold that was more about reassurance than romance. "You saw through the rage to the actual problem and solved it without violence. That's not just brave, Elena. That's brilliant strategic thinking under pressure." Elena let herself lean into his strength for a moment, her face pressed against his chest where she could hear his racing heartbeat. They'd survived. Tommy, the assault, the very real possibility of dying in an office fire. And somehow she'd managed to negotiate a peaceful resolution to a situation that should have ended in blood. "Is it always like this?" she asked quietly. "The constant danger, the negotiations that could go wrong, the violence barely held in check?" "Sometimes," Victor admitted, though this was more dramatic than usual. Most days are boring meetings and paperwork and the occasional strongly worded phone call. "But yes, There's always the possibility that something will go wrong and we'll have to fight our way out of it. Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I can handle it. The danger, the complexity, all of it. But Victor, we need to start thinking long-term about sustainability. How do we build something that doesn't require constant violence to maintain? How do we create stability instead of just managing chaos? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Because Elena wasn't just asking about immediate tactics anymore. She was asking about the future they were building together, and whether that future included an exit strategy from the criminal empire that defined Victor's life. That's a conversation for later, Victor said, though his expression suggested he understood the weight of what she was asking. Right now, we need to clean up this mess and make sure Tommy actually leaves the city before Angelo finds out his nephew's alive and decides to handle the problem permanently. Well, they spent the next 2 hours managing aftermath, calling in a cleaning crew to remove the gasoline and bodies, coordinating with Marcus to ensure Tommy got his money and documents, and reviewing security footage to understand exactly how Tommy's team had breached their defenses. The work was methodical and necessary, but Elena's mind kept returning to the larger question she'd posed. How did they build something sustainable instead of just surviving the next threat? It was late afternoon before they finally returned to Victor's penthouse, both exhausted and running on adrenaline crash. Elena collapsed onto the couch while Victor poured them both drinks, the silence between them comfortable but charged with unspoken questions about what came next. You're thinking about legacy, Victor said finally, handing her a glass of scotch and settling beside her. About what happens when we're too old or too tired to keep fighting off every ambitious young enforcer looking to make a name by taking down Victor Moreau. Am I that obvious? Elena asked. To me, yes, Victor confirmed. You've been strategizing since we left the office. I can see it in the way you're processing events, looking for patterns and long-term solutions instead of just reacting to immediate threats. Elena took a sip of her drink, organizing her thoughts. This morning we almost died because Tommy Castellano's pride got wounded. Next month it'll be someone else with a different grudge. And the month after that, another threat from another direction. We can't build a life, a real life with stability and maybe eventually a family, while constantly looking over our shoulders for the next assassination attempt. So what are you proposing? Victor asked carefully. Transition, Elena said. Not overnight, but over the next 3 to 5 years. We systematically legitimize your operations, divest from the criminal enterprises, and rebuild your empire on completely legal foundations. It'll be slower growth and lower margins, but it'll also be sustainable and defendable, and something we can pass on without our children inheriting blood money. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Elena held her breath, wondering if she'd pushed too far too fast. If asking him to give up the empire he'd spent 20 years building was a bridge too far even for their partnership. I've thought about it, Victor said finally, more over the last 24 hours than the previous 20 years combined. But the framework's been there. The question was always whether I'd find something worth transitioning for, or if I'd die maintaining power until someone younger and hungrier took it from me. He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. You're worth transitioning for. Building a legitimate empire with you is worth more than maintaining a criminal one alone. But Elena, that kind of change will make us vulnerable. Every family that currently respects me because I'm powerful and dangerous will see weakness and try to take advantage. We'll be fighting defensive wars for years while we rebuild. So we make strategic alliances, Elena countered, her mind already working through the chess match. Bring the Irish and Russians deeper into partnership. Give them the criminal operations we're divesting from. Create mutual dependence where attacking us means losing profitable arrangements. Turn potential enemies into allies who have financial incentive to protect us during the transition. Victor's smile was sharp with pride. You've been thinking about this in detail. I've been thinking about our future, Elena corrected. What it looks like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I want to build something with you, Victor. Not just survive day to day, but actually build a legacy that doesn't require our children to be criminals to maintain it. The word children hung in the air between them, too big and too real to ignore. Victor's hand found hers, lacing their fingers together. Children, he repeated, testing the word. You're thinking long term. I'm thinking forever, Elena said honestly. I'm thinking marriage and family and growing old together without federal indictment hanging over our heads. That's what I want, Victor. The question is whether you want it too. Yes, Victor said without hesitation. I want all of it. The legitimate empire, the family, the future where we don't have to kill people to protect what we've built. I want to marry you and give you children and build something that lasts beyond our lifetimes. The declaration sent warmth flooding through Elena's chest. Then we have a plan. 3 to 5 years to transition, strategic alliances to protect us during vulnerability, and complete legitimization by the time we start having children. That's the goal. That's the goal, Victor agreed, pulling her close. Though I'm thinking we should start with the marriage part fairly soon. I'm not interested in waiting years to make you my wife. Elena laughed against his chest. We've been together for approximately 36 hours. Don't you think marriage is moving a little fast? We've been building toward this for 2 years, Victor corrected. The last 36 hours were just when we stopped pretending. But fine. We'll wait until you're confident this is what you want. I can be patient when necessary. Very gracious of you, Elena said dryly. Though, for the record, I'm already confident. I just thought you'd want a more traditional timeline. Victor's smile was wicked. I've never been traditional about anything in my life. Why start with the woman I'm planning to spend forever with? They spent the evening planning in detail, timelines for divesting criminal operations, strategies for legitimizing revenue streams, potential allies to bring into confidence. The work was complex and would require careful execution, but for the first time, Elena could see a path forward that didn't end in prison or violent death. 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony attended by Marcus, Chen, and a handful of trusted associates who understood exactly what kind of empire Victor Moreau was building. Elena wore ivory instead of white, acknowledging the moral complexity of the world they inhabited, and Victor's vows included promises about partnership and honesty alongside the traditional commitment to love and cherish. The transition had begun immediately after Tommy's departure from the city. Victor had brought the Irish and Russians into deeper partnership, trading criminal operations for political alliance and mutual protection. The port traffic was legitimized through proper customs arrangements and legal import documentation. The construction union relationships were restructured as standard labor contracts. The political connections were maintained through campaign contributions that could survive federal scrutiny. It was slow work, and there were setbacks. 2 families tried to test their vulnerability during the first year, but Victor's reputation and strategic alliances held firm. By the end of year 2, the Moreau Empire was operating at 70% legitimate revenue, with the remaining 30% scheduled for divestment or restructuring within the next 18 months. Elena had proven herself as COO, managing the legitimate operations with the same strategic brilliance she'd shown talking down Tommy Castellano. The staff who'd initially resented her promotion had become her strongest supporters once they recognized her capabilities. Morrison had left for a competitor and taken 3 junior associates with him, but the organization was stronger without people who couldn't adapt to new leadership. Year 3 brought the news that Elena was pregnant. Victor's response had been equal parts joy and terror. Joy at the prospect of becoming a father, terror at the vulnerability a child represented in a world where his enemies still existed, even if his criminal operations were mostly dismantled. We need to accelerate the timeline, Victor had said when Elena showed him the positive pregnancy test. I want to be completely legitimate before our daughter is born. No criminal operations, no questionable alliances, nothing that could come back to hurt her. What makes you think it's a daughter? Elena had asked, smiling at his immediate assumption. Because the universe has a sense of irony, Victor had said. And making me raise a girl who'll probably be exactly as stubborn and brilliant as her mother is exactly the kind of poetic justice I deserve. He'd been right. Their daughter was born 8 months later, a healthy baby girl they named Sophie, after Elena's grandmother. Victor had held her in the hospital with the kind of awe that said he couldn't quite believe something so perfect and innocent could be part of his world. She's going to be trouble, he'd said, studying Sophie's tiny face. Of course she is, Elena had agreed. She's our daughter. Trouble is genetic. By the time Sophie was 6 months old, the Moreau Empire was 95% legitimate. The remaining 5%, offshore accounts that couldn't be easily restructured, political relationships that existed in legal gray areas, were being managed through lawyers and accountants instead of direct involvement. Victor had stepped back from active operations entirely. focusing instead on strategic oversight and investment management. But complete transition required one final step: severing the last ties to his criminal past in a way that left no loose ends for federal prosecutors to pursue. That meant having a very difficult conversation with Angelo Castellano about the information Victor still held and what it would take to ensure mutual amnesty. The meeting took place at the same restaurant where they'd negotiated peace 3 years earlier, though this time Elena came as Victor's wife and equal partner rather than leverage to be protected. Sophie stayed with Marcus, who'd proven to be an unexpectedly devoted godfather, despite his profession requiring him to kill people for a living. Angelo looked older than Elena remembered. Silver hair completely white now, face more lined with age and stress. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, still assessing threats and opportunities with the practiced ease of someone who'd survived 40 years in a business where most died young. "Mr. Moreau, Mrs. Moreau," Angelo greeted them, gesturing to the booth. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand congratulations are in order. A daughter, yes?" "Sophie," Victor confirmed, settling into the booth with Elena beside him. 6 months old and already demanding her own way about everything. Takes after her mother. Angelo's smile was genuine. "Children change everything, make you think about legacy and what you're leaving behind. I assume that's why you requested this meeting." "Partially," Victor agreed. "I'm transitioning my operations to completely legitimate business. That means closing loops and ensuring past complications don't become future liabilities. You and I have an arrangement involving information I've collected over the years. I'd like to formalize an agreement about that information's disposition." "You want insurance that I won't use what I know about your transition," Angelo said. "And in exchange, you'll destroy the files you have on my operations." "Not destroy," Victor corrected. "Transfer to a neutral third party with instructions to release everything if either of us violates the mutual non-aggression terms. It's the ultimate insurance policy. We both have too much to lose to ever act against each other." Angelo considered the proposal, his fingers drumming against the wine glass in the same pattern Elena remembered from 3 years ago. "And what about my nephew? Tommy disappeared after that incident at your office. I'd like to know if he's alive or if I should hold a funeral." Victor met Angelo's eyes steadily. "Tommy's alive, living somewhere in the Southwest under a different name, working construction and staying out of trouble as far as I know. I kept my word about giving him a fresh start." Something shifted in Angelo's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude that his nephew hadn't become another casualty of family pride. "Thank you for that. His mother still grieves, but at least she doesn't have to bury her son." "I understand the value of mercy," Victor said quietly, "particularly now that I have a daughter to protect. I'd like to think if she ever makes a mistake driven by wounded pride and poor judgment, whoever she crosses will show her the same consideration I showed Tommy." "Is that what this is about?" Angelo asked. "Creating a world safe enough for your daughter to inherit?" "That's exactly what this is about," Elena said, speaking for the first time. "We're building something sustainable and legitimate because we want Sophie to grow up without the threat of violence or federal prosecution hanging over her family. That means closing all the doors to our past and creating clear boundaries for our future." Angelo studied her with the same attention he'd given Victor 3 years ago. "You've done well, young lady. Convinced Victor Moreau to give up power for legitimacy. That's no small accomplishment." "I didn't convince him," Elena corrected. "We decided together that legacy matters more than empire. That building something our daughter can be proud of is worth more than maintaining criminal operations that would make her a target." Angelo was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "These are copies of every file I have on the Moreau operations. Consider it my contribution to your transition. Destroy them, give them to your neutral third party, do whatever gives you peace of mind. But know that as far as I'm concerned, our war ended the night you negotiated peace to protect this woman. Everything since has just been 2 old men trying to survive long enough to see their families safe." Victor took the envelope, his expression carefully neutral. "This is more than I expected." "I'm 73 years old," Angelo said. "My nephew's gone. My organization is a shadow of what it was, and I'm too tired to keep fighting battles that don't matter anymore." "You want legitimacy for your daughter? I want peace for my declining years. Seems like we can help each other accomplish both goals." The agreement was formalized over the next hour. specific terms about information destruction, mutual non-aggression, and the neutral party who would hold ultimate leverage over both their organizations. By the time they left the restaurant, Victor held documents that effectively erased his criminal past and created legal insulation for his legitimate empire. That went better than expected, Elena said as they drove home through streets that felt safer now than they had 3 years ago. Angelo's ready to retire, Victor observed. He recognized that I'm offering him exactly what he wants. A graceful exit with his dignity intact and his family safe. That's worth more than maintaining territorial disputes with someone who's already transitioning out of the life. They picked up Sophie from Marcus, who reported that she'd been perfect and had only cried twice when she wanted attention. Victor held his daughter close as they rode the elevator to their penthouse, his expression soft in a way Elena had learned meant he was thinking about the future they were building. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked quietly once they were home and Sophie was asleep in her nursery. Giving up the empire, transitioning to legitimacy, accepting lower profits for higher safety? Victor pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist as they stood in front of the windows overlooking the city he'd once controlled through fear and violence. Not even for a second. The empire was just power for power's sake. This, you and Sophie, and the life we're building, this actually matters. This is what I'll remember when I'm old, not how many territories I controlled or enemies I destroyed. Good answer, Elena said, leaning back against him. Though for the record, I wouldn't have blamed you if you missed the excitement occasionally. The negotiations, the chess matches, the adrenaline of operating at that level. Oh, I still get plenty of excitement, Victor said, his voice warm with humor. Watching you negotiate business deals is just as thrilling as anything I did in my criminal days. You've got the same ruthless efficiency, just applied to completely legal objectives. It's remarkably attractive. Elena laughed. Are you saying my business acumen turns you on? Among other things, Victor confirmed, pressing a kiss to her neck that sent heat spiraling through her body. Watching you destroy a competitor's acquisition strategy yesterday was better than any mob confrontation. You're magnificent when you're being professionally ruthless. Flatterer, Elena accused, but she was smiling. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights glitter below them. Somewhere out there, Angelo Castellano was probably having similar conversations about legacy and transition. Tommy was building a new life under a new name, hopefully learning from past mistakes. The families that had once competed for Victor's territory were now partners in legitimate business ventures. The empire had transformed from criminal organization to sustainable business, and Elena had helped architect every step of that transformation. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and challenges and moments when violence had seemed like the only solution. But they'd navigated it together, making strategic decisions that prioritized long-term stability over short-term profits. What are you thinking? Victor asked, his chin resting on top of her head. That we did it, Elena said. Built something real and sustainable and good. Something Sophie can inherit without inheriting our mistakes. We're not done yet, Victor reminded her. Still another year before we're completely legitimate, and there will always be complications from having operated in that world for so long. But yes, we've built something worth protecting. Something that matters more than power or money or empire. 6 months later, Elena discovered she was pregnant again. This time Victor's response was pure joy without the terror. They'd done the work to create a safe space for their family, establish legitimate operations that would survive federal scrutiny, and built alliances based on mutual profit rather than mutual threat. A boy, Victor predicted, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. The universe demands balance. We got a daughter who will probably be too smart for her own good. Now we'll get a son who will be just as much trouble in completely different ways. He was right again. Their son was born 8 months later, a healthy baby boy they named Michael, after Elena's first fiancé. Victor had suggested it, understanding that honoring her past didn't diminish their future. Michael would have liked you, Elena said in the hospital, watching Victor hold their son with the same odd expression he'd shown with Sophie. He was good and kind and wanted safety above everything else. You're all those things now, even if you took a more complicated path to get there. I'd like to think he'd approve of what we've built, Victor said quietly. Not just the business, but the family. The life where our children get to be children instead of targets or leverage. By the time Michael was a year old, the transition was complete. Every criminal operation had been divested or legitimized. Every questionable alliance had been restructured into standard business partnerships, and every file that could implicate them in past crimes had been either destroyed or secured with neutral third parties who had no incentive to release them. Victor Moreau was no longer a crime boss. He was a successful businessman with real estate holdings, import-export operations, and investment portfolios that generated substantial legal income. His wife was his equal partner in all of it, managing operations with strategic brilliance that had earned respect from competitors and allies alike. They'd done it. Built a legitimate empire from criminal foundations, created safety from danger, transformed violence into stability. And they'd done it together, partners in every sense of the word. 3 years after Michael's birth, Elena stood in their penthouse watching their children play. Sophie was 4 now, already showing signs of her father's strategic mind and her mother's determination. Michael was 2, sweet and gentle and fascinated by everything. They were safe, protected, innocent in ways Elena and Victor had never been. Victor came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, in the gesture that had become their shorthand for connection and reassurance. "What are you thinking about?" "That night in the office," Elena said, "when you asked who I was planning to kiss in that red dress. How everything changed in that single moment." "Best question I ever asked," Victor said against her hair. "Though, technically, everything changed the day you walked into my office for that interview and didn't flinch when Morrison pulled a gun during a meeting." "I was too shocked to flinch," Elena admitted, "and too desperate for the job to run screaming like a sensible person would have." "Thank God for desperate and shock," Victor said. "Otherwise, I'd have spent the rest of my life being miserable and powerful instead of happy and legitimate." Elena turned in his arms, studying the man she'd married. Silver had spread through his dark hair, and lines had deepened around his eyes. But he looked younger somehow than he had the night they'd confronted the Castellanos. Less burdened, less haunted by the choices power required. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The empire, the danger, the rush of operating at that level?" "Sometimes," Victor admitted honestly. "But then Sophie asked me to read her a bedtime story, or Michael climbs into my lap demanding attention, and I remember what I was missing all those years I prioritized power over everything else. This is better, Elena. Being a husband and father and legitimate businessman is better than being feared and powerful and alone." "Good," Elena said, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like promise and partnership and the future they'd built together. "Because I'm not planning to let you go back to that life. You're mine now, all the complicated, brilliant, occasionally ruthless parts of you, and I'm keeping you exactly like this." Victor's smile was warm and real and absolutely devastating. "Forever?" "Forever," Elena confirmed. "We chose each other that night in your office. We chose partnership over safety, danger over comfort, honesty over pretense. And every day since, we've kept choosing each other. That's not changing." From the playroom, Sophie called out for her mother, wanting to show off whatever she'd built with her blocks. Michael echoed his sister, demanding equal attention. Victor and Elena moved together to answer their children, hands linked, partnership unshakable. They'd started with a red dress and a question sharp enough to shatter careful boundaries. They'd built an empire and torn it down and rebuilt it into something sustainable and good. They'd survived mob wars and federal scrutiny and the complicated transition from criminal operations to legitimate business. And through it all, they'd chosen each other. Victor Moreau and Elena Ward, partners in business and marriage, and the messy, beautiful work of building a life that mattered more than power. That choice, made again and again across years and challenges and complications, was worth everything they'd sacrificed to get here. It was worth every risk, every consequence, every enemy they'd made along the way. It was worth the world.